Hey everyone, it's Camille. In this multi-part video series, I'm going to be explaining everything you need to know about the Turbo Energize version of Gardevoir EX. So let's go over the main concepts that we'll be covering in this video series. So for the first concept, we have the list breakdown. Second is going to be price checking and fundamental concepts. Third one is going to be the strengths and the weaknesses of the build. And then the fourth one is going to be all about matchups. Let's talk about the list. Now, this is the exact list that Henry Chow and his group played to Milwaukee, so I do not take credit for the list. However, I'm going to do my best to explain all the inclusions in this specific list. So to start off, we have the 3-1-2 Gardevoir line. Now, this is obviously a bit weaker under item lock because we only have one Kirlia, so it's more difficult to raw draw into it. But this really allows us to save a space, and we can compensate for this by playing heavier counts of rare candy. 3 Munkidori is quite standard, one of the best cards in the deck. Pheasantipede and Mew create our kind of stabilizing bench combination and are really essential to our board in almost all situations. Clefairy provides us with great coverage into Dragapult and other Dragon-type decks, while also being a very efficient attacker that deals high damage. Screamtail is another staple, amazing at taking out dangerous threats from the bench and closing out games on 2-prize EX Pokemon. Now we have the Enamorus, which is not something that we've seen much. This Enamorus does 80 plus 120 if we have a matching type. And what this Enamorus does in combination with Energize is it really allows us to create strong 1-prize boards where we do not rely on Gardevoir EX to attack. We'll see all the use cases in the matchup section, of course. Iron Bundle is also an important card that really respects Jellicent Gardevoir and has some other applications. The supporter lineup is quite standard. We have 4 Iono, 4 Lilies, because these are just really good draw supporters. The 1 Research, which is a good secret box target if our hand is not holding many crucial cards that we don't mind discarding. The Professor Turl really helps against all the clutch decks, and it's just a good situational card to have. We have the 1 Arven to get our secret box and some of our tools, and it's also quite a good secret box target. For Ultra Ball, 3 Vessel, quite standard. We have the 3 Rare Candy. Now, 3 Rare Candy synergizes very well when we're playing high counts of Lily's Determination, because especially after your opponent takes a KO, we can easily Lily and then Pheasantipede, and we have high chances to simply draw into Rare Candy Gardevoir. Now, the Night Stretchers are standard, 2 Nest Ball also standard, 1 Counter Catcher. Now, most lists play 2, but you really only need 1 in this list because we are trying to often go through the active Pokemon while having Screamtail to clean up any bench Pokemon that we need to. The Secret Box is the best A-Spec in the game. A Super Rod just adds to our recovery. And the 2 Bravery Charms, very important to boost our damage ability with Screamtail, but also serves as a great HP boost in defensive situations where we need to put on our Fez or other 2-prize Pokemon, even Munkidori at times. We have the 2 TM Turbo Energize. This is going to be talked about in the matchup section, but the TM really provides a lot of utility in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different matchups. So it's super crucial that we can not only use it early, but also draw into it without using an Arven or a secret box, so that's why there's 2 copies. 2 Artisan is really standard. Most of our box plays will be getting a Nest Ball and an Artisan to find 2 basic Pokemon. And then the energy count, we are playing 8 Psychic just because it's better to draw into it. Synergizes well with Turbo Energize. We have multiple Vessel. On most turns of the game, we really want to be seeing Psychic Energy. And the 3 Dark paired with the 3 Munkidori, quite standard. In this section, we're going to talk about price checking. So how I do it is that my main objective is that I need to check 3 on 6 of my prize cards on the first search, and then throughout the game, with search cards, I can gradually find all of the other ones. Now, it's important to first check the energies and the Pokemon, right? Followed by all of our key trainers. So I'm really going to put emphasis on checking all Psychic, all Dark, and all the Pokemon that are prized before I'm going to check for one-ofs and supporters and other cards like Recovery. Another point I want to make is that in 50-minute +1 format, it is crucial that we are fast and efficient rather than thorough, right? If you think about it like this, if we are spending 2 minutes every game prize checking all 6, that's 6 minutes in the 50-minute set. Now that's really a lot of time allocated to prize checking when in most cases 3 on 6 will be very sufficient for any game plans that we want to do. So let's talk about our keys to success and a lot of our fundamental concepts when we're playing Gardevoir. Now these 4 concepts will be talked about throughout all the matchups, and these will be our common themes that we're going to be working around. So our first one, we have creating stable boards early game through proper bench management. Right? So this can be stuff like not benching extra Pokemon or making sure that we don't have any liabilities. The next one will be winning in 3 attacks in combination with Adrenabrain. So a lot of our game plans are going to revolve around 3-turn prize maps, and we'll see that in the matchup section. We also want to be sure that we're manipulating our damage properly with Psychic Embrace, and we are preloading energy onto attackers where applicable. This can be, an example of this can be we're always trying to promote Gardevoir EX to put 40 damage onto it and then retreat, right? This gives us extra damage with our Adrenabrain. And the last point here is I really want to emphasize that it's crucial to understand where we need to play with a lone Gardevoir line and how we can present onboard threats. So now let's talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of this Turbo Energize build. So one of the main strengths is that we are incredibly versatile and we can always adapt to situations using Energize to charge attackers, even presenting threats with no Gardevoir EX on board. We can quickly overwhelm opponents with multiple Monkey Dories, or, as I said before, strong one-prize attackers such as Enamorus. We also have strong Dark-type matchups due to the ability to present onboard threats without any Gardevoir. Right? We're a very explosive deck due to high rare candy counts, and we're also less reliant on going second because we do not play TM Evo. And if we go first and are able to find a Candy Gardevoir turn 2, we are often in a very, very good spot. Now let's talk about some of the weaknesses of the Turbo Energize build. So we are weaker than certain builds under item lock due to the fact that we are not playing TM Evolution, and we also have only one Kirlia, so it's actually much harder to draw into it under item lock just with a draw supporter. We are reliant on early Energize into certain matchups with limited ways of finding it. We need to aggressively find Candy Gardevoir in a lot of these turbo matchups, especially when we're going first, due to the fact that we do not have Kirlias and we also do not have TM Evolution. And compared to some of the Drifloon builds, we don't have any ways to easily take one-hit KOs on other big stage 2 Pokemon, and we have to rely on taking prizes over multiple turns with the use of Adrenabrain and some of our lower damage one-prize attackers. This slide is going to try to illustrate our best starter and our worst starter and everything in between. So, best starter in all matchups will be Mungidori. This is just a great starter. We can attach to it and threaten Mind Bend on our second turn without a Gardevoir. And we always want Mungidori down in every matchup. Same thing for Ralts. Very good starter. One retreat. Can collect if needed. And we always need Ralts. Third will be Iron Bundle, because it is not a bench liability, since we can always pop the Iron Bundle. And it is also a one-prizer with one retreat. Number 4 is going to be Pheasantipity EX. Unlike a lot of people think, Pheasantipity EX is actually a very good starter because we often want Pheasantipity on our board in many situations, and it is a bulky 2-prizer that can survive some hits, has 1 retreat, and is solid in the active spot. Number 5, we have Mew EX. This also provides our board with stability, has free retreat to easily get into any other Pokemon that we would want to, and is very good to draw cards if we have a weak hand. Number 6 is going to be Enamorus. Not applicable in every situation, right? Not the strongest in certain matchups, but still a 1-prize, decent attacker that retreats for 1. Number 7 is going to be Screamtail, right? And you might be surprised that Screamtail is so low, but in my opinion, Screamtail is a really terrible starter because it really clogs up our bench, especially in matchups that we don't want to use it, right? If a deck plays Shaman, starting a Screamtail is really bad for our bench composition. And number 8, with our worst starter, we have Clefairy EX. This is just one of our worst starters because it does not provide any draw to our board, so no stability is added with it, and we really don't want to have it down unless we are trying to attack with it or it's really needed for the matchup. Okay, so now let's get into the heart of the guide, which will be the matchup section. So for each matchup, I will base the matchup around 4 key points. How do we set up our early boards? And how do we set ourselves up for success in the following turns? How do we use Turbo Energize, right? Which Pokemon should we be using it onto? Number 3 is going to be choosing your attacker, right? We play a variety of attackers in this deck. It's very important that we know which ones we should be prioritizing in which matchups. And number 4, I'll be providing a lot of example boards that we can go over how to progress the game and how to take 6 prizes. Another important thing to understand is which matchups do we want to go first and which matchups do we want to go second. Now, on the left here, we see that these are all the matchups that we want to go first into. So Raging Bolt, Tera Box, Flareon, Ceruledge, and Gholdengo. Now, you might notice a common theme here. These are mostly decks that play Fan Rotom, and also decks that are aggressive and want to attack on early turns. Now, here we want first because we want to be able to have the most turns of setup without them getting a good attack off, right? Against Raging Bolt, very unlikely that they get a turn 1 going second attack. Same thing for Tera Box, Flareon, impossible for Ceruledge, and Gholdengo has to use Zoroark if they want to attack on their first turn going second, but we can often just have a Monkey Dory to protect ourselves. Now, for the matchups that we want to go second, these are going to be mostly setup matchups against other Stage 2 decks and against decks that want to go second. So we have Grimmsnarl, Gardevoir, Charizard, Absol Box, Joltik Box, and Zoroark, and Dragapult Dusknoir. Another important thing to understand is which matchups do we want to go first and which matchups do we want to go second. Now, on the left here, we see that these are all the matchups that we want to go first into. So Raging Bolt, Tera Box, Flareon, Ceruledge, and Gholdengo. Now, you might notice a common theme here. These are mostly decks that play Fan Rotom, and also decks that are aggressive and want to attack on early turns. Now, here we want first because we want to be able to have the most turns of setup without them getting a good attack off, right? Against Raging Bolt, very unlikely that they get a turn 1 going second attack. Same thing for Tera Box, Flareon, impossible for Ceruledge, and Gholdengo has to use Zoroark if they want to attack on their first turn going second, but we can often just have a Monkey Dory to protect ourselves. Now, for the matchups that we want to go second, these are going to be mostly setup matchups against other Stage 2 decks and against decks that want to go second. So we have Grimmsnarl, Gardevoir, Charizard, Absol Box, Joltik Box, and Zoroark, and Dragapult Dusknoir. Let's get into the matchup against pure Gardevoir. So here we have Max Roberts' 10th place list from Gdansk, and pretty standard Gardevoir list, playing 4 Vessel, 2 Bravery Charm, the main attackers being Drifloon, Screamtail, and Munkidori. So let's explore how we should be playing these matchups. So here are going to be the key concepts that we need to think about while we're playing this matchup. We need to always prioritize our Munkidoris, right? The person who has the Munkidori lead is very often favored in this type of matchup. We want to always stay within 1 prize card, right? So 1 prize card behind or 1 prize card ahead is the sweet spot. If we start falling 2 or more prize cards behind, it gets very, very difficult to play the board. And our third point here is that we really want to always be focusing our opponent's Munkidori with Screamtail and sometimes Countercatcher, because we really want to be controlling the Munkidori war, and we do not want to let them get a Munkidori lead, because then this can lead to very awkward and difficult boards to navigate. Some other concepts here, we have the fact that it's very, very good to always energize to Munkidori, right? This gives us the early Munkidori lead and can be very, very strong going into the later stages of the game. Serendipity is actually an excellent piece on your board, and I would always put it down. Very, very good under disruption, especially since we will be trading Munkidoris back and forth and taking prize cards, and the longer the game goes on, the more the Ionos will be effective. And the last point here is that Enamorus is a pretty strong 1 prize option in a lot of situations. If we don't have access to Screamtail, if we don't have access to a better play, Enamorus is good because it provides us with an attacker that KOs the active, but also it does not get KO'd by multiple Adrenabrains because of its 120 HP, right? When we're trading Munkidoris with Screamtail, we always have to be careful because our Screamtail can easily die to 2 Munkidoris. Enamorus does not have this problem, and in a lot of situations, it is actually quite a strong piece on the board. So now we'll talk about playing from ahead versus playing from behind. So when we're playing from ahead, these are the main things that we want to keep in mind. It's always good to take the lead if we can attack first, right? If we're able to get the first attack off, I would always take the lead. This gives you the first turn to end the game with a Screamtail onto a 2-prizer. Also comes at some disadvantages because we will not have access to Countercatcher the entire game, leaving us either to use Screamtail to target the bench or always go through the active Pokemon. And this could be a problem because it also gives our opponent the access to Countercatcher and to maybe KO our full HP Gardevoir with one of their big threats such as Drifloon. When we're playing from behind, here are a few of the important parts. If ever we're in a situation where we can Countercatcher Fez and Screamtail Munkidori, this essentially makes them lose a Munkidori attachment for that turn because they are forced to attach to Fez in order to retreat, right? When we play from behind, we're also stronger into disruption as we're seeing 1 more card throughout the game. And when we're playing from behind, we do not need multiple Gardy lines, right? If our opponent never has access to Countercatcher, our Gardevoir EX is always safe from threats, as it is highly unlikely that a Screamtail can ever threaten our Gardevoir EX. Going into our optimal first turn board, right? As I mentioned before, very crucial to use Energize onto Munkidori to gain the Munkidori lead early. So here we have a Ralts, we attach, and we Energize onto 2 Munkidoris. Now let's talk about the Munkidori Wars, right? In this case, we could have gone second, we Energize onto 2 Munkidoris, and our opponent got some Ralts down and attached the Psychic to the Munkidori and pass it over. In this situation, we are already leading the Munkidori War 2-1, right? So if our opponent were to get a Candy Gardevoir and manage to KO one of our Munkidori, while also establishing a Munkidori of their own, we would still be able to have a 1 Munkidori lead on the next turn, right? So this is just an illustration of how strong Turbo Energize is at gaining the monkey advantage early on in the game. Let's assume that we were not able to get Energize, right? We miss Energize, and our opponent gets the first attack off, and they KO one of our Munkidoris with Screamtail. This is where we enter into a Munkidori War, where each player, on their turn, their goal is to KO a Munkidori in order to stop the progression of multiple Munkidoris on their opponent's side, right? So the top player KO'd a Munkidori by putting 3 energies on the Screamtail, moving 10 damage over to my Munkidori, and using Roaring Scream for 100. Now, moving this 10 damage is incredibly important because we do not want our Screamtail to die to a single monkey, right? So 50 damage on the Screamtail ensures that I, on my turn, need to use 2 Adrenabrains in order to knock it out. After we trade back and forth, we take turns KOing our Munkidoris for a couple of turns. We enter into a stalemate, right? So in this board, on the bottom, that person is about to use a Screamtail attack, moving 10 damage onto a Munkidori to KO the Munkidori. Now going into the player on the top's turn, it is now 2-2. As talked about before, they actually have the first attempt to close out the game by taking 2 prizes on the Pheasantipede. But as we can see, it's very, very difficult because it's very hard to get the necessary energy onto Screamtail while also getting monkey damage to push over with Adrenabrain. In this situation, it's a very tricky situation because the person on the top does not want to take 1 prize card, right? If the person on the top takes 1 prize card, they open themselves up to Countercatcher and possibly a Drifloon KO or another strong attacker such as Clefairy, or with the use of Turo can also end the game. In this situation, it's very crucial to have Fez on the board, as it provides us with stability through the Ionos, right? And the winner of this game is going to come down to the following, right? Whoever is less affected by disruption, whoever has the more Munkidoris on their board, and whoever is managing their Bravery Charms best, right? So in this case, both Pheasantipodes have a Bravery Charm, which is a very defensive Bravery Charm, right? This makes it much harder for Screamtail to KO the Pheasantipede on the bench. But if we have another Bravery Charm, we can also use it to try and reach into the Pheasantipede. It's important to recognize in a situation like this when it is acceptable to take 1 prize and go down to 1 if you think your opponent can't close the game. If your opponent has a weak board, meaning no Pheasantipede, no draw available, if they don't have a lot of access to Psychic Energy in the discard, and if you think that they would struggle to finish the game on their turn, right? If not, it becomes kind of a waiting game until one person can take 2 prizes in 1 turn. Now here are some final notes to keep in mind while you're practicing this matchup. Right? Mew EX copying Screamtail is actually an easy way to reach a 2-prize KO without the use of Bravery Charm. Right? So this can come up in certain situations, just keep this in mind. Now, attacking with Gardevoir EX is actually a strong play when we're ahead if we have a backup Gardevoir line, but it is actually weak from behind since it allows our opponents to hit into our Gardevoir and clean it up with Screamtail later. Munkidori is a good attacker to take 1-prize KOs, especially into a Screamtail that previously KO'd one of your Munkidoris if you have no access to Screamtail or other attackers. More things to keep in mind. Our recovery is incredibly important for re-establishing Munkidori and Dark. And we want to really prioritize keeping these cards, so let's choose to discard others when using Ultra Ball or Secret Box or Earthen Vessels. Now, the final thing that I want to say is that Gardevoir mirrors depend heavily on each player's exact 60 and how well both players are drawing during the game. It's also important to realize that creativity is very rewarded, and it's a matchup that needs to be practiced extensively to be able to get yourself out of some holes and some difficult situations when you are behind. Alright, so now let's move on to Jellicent Gardevoir matchup. Now this is going to be a bit different because their plan is going to be using Item Lock to get ahead. Here is Jamie Hindley's 12th place list from Gdansk. Pretty standard. They have the Air Balloon to get into early Frillish, and then the 2-1 Jellicent line along with all of the other attackers. Note the 3-1-2 Gardevoir with the 3 Candy, similar to us, and very similar supporter line. They also have the Devo that we need to be very careful of in this matchup, so let's see how it goes. So, most of the concepts will stay the same, as I previously talked about into Pure Gardevoir, but with Iron Bundle, we have an answer to an aggressive Jellicent from them early. Now, still holds that using Turbo Energize onto 2 Munkidoris is quite strong, as it allows us to win the Monkey War, right? And they can actually avoid to put Jellicent in play, but instead use Frillish and Frillish Shuffle for a few turns, but I'll show you later on why this doesn't really work for them, as if we have a Munkidori active with an energy, we actually threaten to KO the Frillish on our turn. Another couple points are that if they attack with Jellicent, so if they go into Jellicent early, we can use Iron Bundle to push the Jellicent away, enabling our rare candies, and we can get into Gardevoir and then continue the mirror as we would normally. If we have the Monkey lead here, it allows us to actually aggressively KO the Jellicent with Gardevoir later on with the help of multiple Adrenabrains. We have to be very careful of Devo, because on the turn we bundle the Jelly away, we want to establish a Kirlia as well as recover the bundle if our board is very weak to Jellicent attack. Okay. Now, Enamorus is also quite strong, as it gives us a 1-prizer that hits quite hard into an opposing Jelly. If they go Jellicent early, and then we actually use Energize onto Enamorus, and we can attack the Jellicent without having a Gardevoir in play, which is actually quite strong. And as I mentioned here, it's also quite strong to Energize onto that Enamorus if we see that they tend to be attacking with an early Jellicent. Here I have some early boards that we should be working towards when we're facing Jelly Gardy. So on the left, we see a Munkidori active that just use Energize and put 1 Dark Energy onto another Munkidori. Now, this is very good because we have an active Munkidori that if they attack with Frillish, we can move 20 with Adrenabrain, attach another Psychic, and use Mind Bend for the KO. On the right here, we see a similar thing where we use Energize onto Enamorus, and now we are threatening both the Munkidori Mind Bend KO onto the active Frillish, but also we're threatening an Enamorus to hit into a Jellicent if they decide to go that route. Some final notes to keep in mind are that this matchup will play very similarly to everything we discussed previously. Just be careful about devolution and try to always maintain the Munkidori lead. This is the same concepts that were talked about in the straight Gardy guide all apply. And once again, the matchup is a very fluid one where there are not exact set lines, so be sure to practice it and be creative. Let's talk about Dragapult Dusknoir. Now this is Alberto Conti's second place from the recent Lille Regional. Quite standard, playing 2 Jamming Tower, 1 Turo, the regular suspects in the 2-2-1 Dusknoir line, as well as the 4-4-3 Dragapult. Choosing to include the Munkidori, Hawlucha, so when we're playing against them, we just have to know all of their tools that are available. Now, some of the key points here and some of the key concepts. Since we only have 1 Kirlia and no TM evolution, most of the game will actually be played without Gardevoir. As scary as this seems, it's really not all that bad. In this matchup, Fez is actually your best attacker using Cruel Arrow to disrupt their setup. If we can get an early Energize onto Fez, we can start to really pressure their board and limit all of their options. When we're using Cruel Arrow, it's very important to choose the right target, KOing Dusclops or Dracloak or any other threat that is strongest. Even though we won't have easy access to Gardevoir, it's actually quite feasible to set up very strong and resilient boards. An example of this would be to have a Charmed Clefairy with multiple Ralts and with Fez attacking. Now this presents a strong board because we present multiple threats. We present Fez sniping all of the Dracloaks or Ghost pieces, and we also threaten the active Dragapult with our Clefairy. So here we have our optimal turn 1 going second board. We have a Munkidori active with a Dark that has used Energize to put 2 Psychic Energies onto Fez, and we also have 2 Ralts down. This is very strong because we are threatening to use Cruel Arrow onto a Dracloak or a Ghost piece on our following turn. We're often faced with a difficult decision in a board like this where we're asked, what should we KO in this spot? Right? What do we choose to Cruel Arrow, and why should we choose that? Also, how can we set up our board for success in the following turns, right? So looking at this board here, we see that our opponent has 2 Dracloaks established, along with a Dusclops, a Duskull, and a GP. What comes to mind here is that KOing Dracloak with energy can be quite strong, as they do not have any other energy on board. But we can also choose to KO Dusclops, reducing their range into some of their board wipe combos. When we set up our board for success in the following turns, well, our goal will be to establish a Clefairy with a Bravery Charm, preventing a Boss Phantom Dive to KO it directly. And we also want to establish another Ralts so that we have at least 3, pressuring their Ghost pieces to be used if they want to completely board wipe us of attackers. Here's what a sample mid-game board should look like when you're facing them. We have a Fez in the active attacking with Cruel Arrow. We have 2 Ralts benched, Munkidori, and we have a Lily's Clefairy with a Psychic and a Bravery Charm. This is preventing them from doing a couple things, right? If they decide to board wipe our Ralts with the use of Hawlucha and Countercatcher, or Dusclops and Countercatcher with Phantom Dive, we already have the KO on board with another attachment to Clefairy, and we can re-establish our Ralts on that turn that we KO the Dragapult, making it difficult for them to completely remove any of the options we have to win. This is an example of an endgame board, right? Dragapult is a little bit slow to start, so it's not crazy that we would take a few early prizes with Cruel Arrow. So in this situation, we've taken 2 prizes with Cruel Arrow. We have a Kirlia and a Ralt setup, as well as our Clefairy with a Bravery Charm and an Energy. If we look at it from their position, they have to deal with a few things, right? It's hard for them to deal with Clefairy and the Ralt pieces at the same time, so they're going to have to make a choice. If they decide to use Hawlucha and Countercatcher, or Dusclops and Countercatcher to remove our Kirlia line, well, then Clefairy comes in and takes 2 prizes onto Dragapult DX, bringing us down to 2 prizes, while they will be at 4. And if they had to use a Ghost piece, then we would consequently be only at 1 prize, with both a Clefairy on the board and a Fezandipiti, presenting a checkmate position. So it's very important to see how even without Gardevoir, we can put a lot of pressure on them into making maybe suboptimal choices. Here are some final notes to keep in mind while you practice the matchup. It's crucial to always present threats on board through the use of Cruel Arrow and Clefairy EX. Overbenching is one of the easiest ways to lose, and we do not need to overbench and bench multiple Monkey Dories. We want our bench to have enough space if we need to bench Mew or Clefairy and Fezandipiti, multiple Ralts, right? We want to keep those options available. We do not need to clog our bench for no reason. And this is something I alluded to in the previous boards, but it is very difficult for them to board wipe all of our threats, right? As we saw in the previous slide, it was difficult for them to remove all the Ralts line and the Clefairy and the Fez, right? It's impossible. So they always have to leave us with something. And it is our job to make sure that our board is strong enough to withstand whatever their best play is, right? If they decide to go aggressive and KO the Clefairy or KO the Fez, then we can get into Gardevoir with access to our rare candies, and then we can actually attempt to board wipe them with a Mew EX, Phantom Dive, and having Clefairy benched. Alright, so now let's get into the matchup into Gholdengo Rocks. So here's the sample list that I have. This is Christian Fontenot's 4th place list from Gdansk. Notable inclusions: he's playing the Premium Power Pro, the Picnic Basket, as well as the Vitality Band and Lana's Aid. It's important that we recognize how many boss they play and how many Turo's scenario. This will help us in certain endgame situations. Now, the key concepts for this matchup, right? We really need to attempt to trade them 2-2-2 very quickly and efficiently, right? Our best attackers to use this are going to be Screamtail with a Bravery Charm and 6 energies, reaching a cap of 240. And then with Adrenabrain, we can reach that 260. Other than that, we also have Clefairy EX, right? With this new Gholdengo Rocks build, they are often forced to have at least 4 bench to accommodate all their pieces. So Clefairy is hitting for 200, and then we can use 2 Adrenabrains to KO a Gholdengo at 260. We also need to be careful to not try and 2-shot any Pokemon on their board or do anything fancy, because they just draw so many cards per turn, it's very hard for them to whiff important pieces. Another really interesting play is to use our TM Turbo Energize onto our Iron Bundle to essentially simulate an Earthen Vessel and Ultra Ball combination,
right? This allows us to discard 2 Psychics very early and reach our Scream Tail threshold much earlier than we would have. In this matchup, when we fall behind, it's very hard to come back from unless they with an air balloon on a turn or with a Turo, right? So the goal is to go fast and try and 2-2-2 them as easily as possible. Another few points here. Enamorus can be quite a good attacker that does 200 damage. So in combination with 2 Adrenabrains, we do reach that 260. But it is type dependent. So they either need to have a Gimme Ghoul down or some other type that matches us. In theory, this works, but in practice, they often can easily play around this. So this is not a great line. The worst possible situation for us is that they're also playing Tool Scrapper, right? Tool Scrapper allows them to KO our Screamtail as well as use a boss and KO our Gardevoir, taking a 3-prize turn, right? But even if this happens, we still have ways to win, and I'll show you how to do it in the following slides. The last point here I want to make is that Monkey Dory is incredibly important in this matchup. We rely on Adrenabrain to take any KOs as our deck does not hit 260 easily at all, right? So we really want to prioritize getting these Monkey Dories down and getting the Dark Energy down as well. Here's an example of our first turn board going first, right? As I mentioned in the matchup section, this is a matchup where we do want to go first, so that we can get 2 turns of setup before they get a good attack off. Now, in this situation, we have a Monkey Dory active, we attach a Dark, we have 2 Ralts on the bench. Something else to add in this board is that if they are going second, they can use a Boss's Orders, or Prime Catcher, or even Iron Bundle to take a KO on our Ralts on the bench, right? So ideally, we would also like to have another Monkey Dory on the bench to protect ourselves from Iron Bundle. Not that common in lists, but just something to be aware of. Here's a first turn board where we are going second, right? So here is where we're going to use the Iron Bundle trick. We're going to have a Monkey Dory active with a Dark, and we're going to energize 2 Psychic Energy onto Iron Bundle. This allows us to essentially discard 2 Psychic Energy when we use Hyper Blower, and this allows us to reach our Screamtail 6 energy play much easier. Kind of a concept in this matchup that I'm sure you are seeing is that in this matchup, we need to play to draw well. We need to play to draw turn 2 Candy Gardy and really big attacks with Screamtail, right? So always play towards this. Be aggressive in your discards. Be aggressive benching Fez. We really need to accelerate our game plan and try and hit these high numbers fast. So this is a sample early board in which we energized onto Iron Bundle. They have taken 1 prize card with their Gholdengo. Now we have a choice, right? Our best play here is to immediately try and reach that 6 energy Screamtail KO, right? So we can pop the Iron Bundle, get an extra 2 Psychic discarded. We need to find Candy Gardy, Screamtail, 6 energies. So Screamtail is doing 240, and then we can move 20 damage with Adrenabrain to KO a Gholdengo. Now, whenever we're KOing a Gholdengo early, it's always important to KO the Gholdengo with the energy, right? We want to always force out another attachment from them and really stretch their resources as much as possible. This is another sample board in which instead of going for the Iron Bundle play, right, we see that they have already benched 4 Pokemon. This means that if we have a full bench, our Clefairy is hitting for 200 damage by using Full Moon Rondo, right? So in this situation, it might be optimal to actually Turbo Energize 2 Double Monkey Dory and attempt to KO the Gholdengo using Clefairy plus Double Adrenabrain, right? So we always want to be aware of what attackers we can use to take 2 prizes and we always want to be aware of how their bench is looking and what we can take advantage of. This is an illustration of possibly the worst situation for us, right? They took one. We managed to hit the 6 energy Screamtail attack with the Bravery Charm to KO a Gholdengo, take 2 prizes. Then on their turn, they use Boss's Orders on our Gardevoir EX, use Scrapper to KO the Screamtail, and take a 3-prize turn. Right? Don't worry though, it's not over yet. Right? We still have a chance, and I'll show you what we should do. Ideally, we're able to get into another Gardevoir, right? We have to get into another Gardevoir, so Fez is going to be drawing cards. We're going to be using Ionos. We're going to be using our supporters to really try and reach this combo. We're going to use another Screamtail, right? Same idea. 6 energy Screamtail, move 20 with Adrenabrain, and KO the Gholdengo with energy, right? Now, in this situation, we're going down to a 2-2 situation. So, they can simply win the game by using Boss's Orders and KOing our Fezandipity. But they could whiff, right? It's possible. Now, if they do whiff, how should we end the game, right? We have a Gholdengo on the bench with 20 damage, a Gholdengo active with 20 damage, which we will be KOing with Screamtail, right? The easiest thing that comes to mind here are that we can recycle Screamtail and use Screamtail to KO the Genesect by using double Adrenabrain to do 60 damage, plus 160 is a perfect 220. Otherwise, we can attempt to establish a third Munkidori and use Miracle Force for 190 in combination with 3 Munkidoris will KO any freshly healed Gholdengo. Right? So these are just the ideas of how the matchup should play out. In practice, obviously sometimes it doesn't happen, but these are the guidelines that we have to have when we're approaching these situations. Some final notes to keep in mind. As I mentioned before, we must look for openings to take early 2 with Clefairy and double Adrenabrain, right? This is super strong because it allows us to not need so many energy while also being much easier to hit than the Screamtail 6 energy combination. If we don't have any other attackers that are best in that situation, we can always Mind Bend, right? Mind Bend will force out Balloons and will force out Turo Scenario because they don't want to flip. And every Balloon and Turo we force out makes our next Mind Bend that much stronger, right? We always want to keep this concept in mind. For the Energize targets, I already talked about it a bit before. We're basically going to prioritize using Energize onto Iron Bundle to accelerate our 6 energy Screamtail KO. But if we see that they have a large bench and we don't think that the Screamtail KO is realistic, then we can pivot to energizing onto Munkidori. There's also a couple more lines that we can go for, right? If they take 1, we can actually use a counter catcher onto their Genesect and KO it with either Clefairy X or even a Gardevoir, right? Something that's interesting is that if they take 1 prize, we can actually attempt to force them through 3 Gardevoirs by having multiple Munkidori set up, right? So this is just another way to find 2 prizes early because it's essential that we are trading with them, right? We cannot fall behind 3, 4 prizes. We will just always lose. Right? Now, if they also go complete 1 prize board early, right? So multiple gimmies, Solrock, Lunatone, some other Pokemon, we can attempt to Mind Bend the Solrock with a 1 prizer, right? So Munkidori Mind Bends the Solrock, And we can use Adrenabrain to move damage onto the Lunatone, essentially taking 2 prizes in a few turns, right? We KO the Zoroark, and then on the turn where we're going to end, we can Adrenabrain KO the Lunatone and end the game that way, right? We also want to put them in a situation where they are forced to use Turo to not lose. And if they use Turo, right, we remember supporter debt, they cannot use boss's orders. This is going to be super important in evaluating our lines as we're playing the matchup. Alright, so the next matchup I have here is going to be the Charizard Pidgeot matchup. Now the sample list I provided here is Jackson Ford's first place Milwaukee list. So important things to keep in mind when we're playing this matchup. They have Miss Energy to stop Mind Bend, right? This is very, very important and allows their Charizard to freely attack without ever flipping through confusion. Jet Energy is also a really good tool for them to get out of confusion. They have the Dusknoirs that are going to be threatening our Ralts pieces, and Shaman, which is stopping our Screamtail, and they also have Klefki that they can push to stifle our Monkey Dory development, right? Apart from that, they're playing 2 boss. We have to be careful of Briar as well. And then the main suspects in the Charizard and Pidgeot line, right? The key concepts in this matchup, the biggest one I would say, is that if they ever have a lone Pidgeotto or lone Pidgey without a Shaman, we always want to KO it, right? Their deck is incredibly reliant on quick searching every turn as they do not have a draw engine. The quicker we can remove the bird from play, the easier our game plans will become. If they have a good setup, right, they're able to use Evo, they're able to get into Pidgeotto, Charmeleon, they have a Shaman on the board. If they have a good setup, we really need to prioritize establishing Monkey Dories and not giving them counter catcher access. We want them to use Boss every time they want to Gust, because using CC just gives them too many power plays, right? When we're using TM Energize, we will always be using it onto Monkey Dory, as Monkey Dory is our queen in this situation. Few more points here. A Charmed Clefairy can be a good attacker in a pinch. That does force them to use a Dusclops pop. Be careful though, we want to be sure that we're at 6 prizes, 6 or 5 prizes, to not let Charizard KO our Clefairy for free. Right. Mew EX is going to be our best late game attacker that really threatens high damage into Charizard EX, especially when they've already taken a couple of prize cards. Something that I see a lot of people maybe being scared of is that late game, even if they have a Pidgeot on the board, we can often Iono them down to a low number, 3, 2, 1, right? And force them to find a 3-card combo, right? Oftentimes, if we are using Iono and we're KOing an active Zard with Mew, for example, they often need, Rare Candy, Charizard, Super Rod to be able to KO our Mew, right? Even with Pidgeot on the board, this is actually quite a difficult combo for them to pull off, so we need to be aware of this play and play towards it if we have no better options. Here's a sample board, right? We've set up, we have a Ralts active, we've energized onto 2 Monkey Dories. They have also had a very good setup. They used Evo into Charmeleon and Pidgeotto. They have a Duskull, another Charmander, and they have a Shaman protecting them from any Screamtail attacks, right? This is a very important situation, right? This happens almost every game, and we need to know how to deal with it. So essentially in this type of board, we have 2 main options. Now, this will depend on whether they decide to initiate the prize race or not, right? In this situation, both players are at 6-6, and it is their turn, right? They can evolve into Charizard, they can KO our Ralts, they can even Rare Candy Dusknoir, and KO 2 Ralts, right? If they were to initiate, their best play is to Dusknoir a benched Ralts while KOing the active Ralts, right? From here, our best play is to remove the Pidgeot from the board, right? This is our crucial concept in this matchup. We need to remove the Pidgeot from the board. So if they do initiate, I'll show you what our response should be, right? They use the Dusknoir to KO our benched Ralts, KO the active Ralts with a Charizard. Now it is our turn, and we have to make the best play possible, right? We have no way of dealing with the Charizard, as our Mew EX does not deal enough damage yet. We also don't have access to Mind Bend because we know that they have a Pidgeot and they have Jet Energy in deck, right? So Mind Bend is very ineffective, as 60 damage is just not helping us in any way. Our best play here is to promote the Ralts, retreat with our Gardevoir that we are able to candy into, and then get a 6 energy Screamtail, move 40 damage onto the Pidgeot, and do 240 onto the Pidgeot in combination with an Iono, right? This will bring us down to 3 prizes, while they will be at 4. Right? And if we look at this board, when we're Ionoing them down to 4, and KOing the Pidgeot, it will be very hard for them to continue setting up their pieces, right? Any extra ghost pieces are going to be hard to find, and they're really reliant on these 2 main attackers, the Charizard and the Charmeleon, to finish the game for them, right? So this is what we want to be thinking about. We always want to be putting pressure on their engine. Now you might be asking, what happens if they don't initiate, right? What should we do? If they don't initiate, right, this is a similar board to what we had before, except they evolve all of their pieces and they simply pass, waiting for a better play, right? Maybe they want to use a boss's orders, or maybe they want to develop their board some more, right? Get some more energies down, maybe find a better supporter, right? Stuff like that, right? So on our turn here, the main goal is that we cannot give them access to Counter Catcher. When Charizard Pidgeot has access to Counter Catcher, their deck is simply too powerful, right? They have an item gust, and they are searching for any card they want on any turn. If we were to evolve into Gardevoir here, they could easily take a 3-prize turn, and it would be very hard for us to come back, right? So we have a few options here, right? We can't really use Screamtail because we probably will not have enough damage, right? Of course, if we're able to 6 energy Screamtail plus move 40 damage with Adrenabrain, we always KO the Pidgeot, right? We will always KO the Pidgeot if we can by using a Screamtail plus double Adrenabrain, right? But this is quite a difficult play to hit in this situation, so we need to think of another option, right? Remember, we do not want to take a KO and start winning the prize trade, as CC is too powerful. So what can we do? We need to be able to do some damage, right? We need to advance our board state, but without taking a KO. So what I would like to see here is I would like to retreat my Ralts, maybe evolve into Kirlia, push my Munkidori into the active, attach a Psychic Energy, and Mind Bend the Tatsugiri for 60, right? This does a few things. This gives us damage on board while not taking a KO, and it is a prize card we can clean up very easily in the late game, right? So do not give CC, try and advance the board state, push some damage without taking KOs, right? We also want to leave Gardevoir off the board unless we can cripple their setup, right? So Gardevoir would be reasonable to come down if we can actually reach into the Pidgeot and KO it with Screamtail. But if we can't do that, Our other plays are quite weak, so we want to leave the 2-prizer off the board. So these are some key ideas on how we should approach the early game, right? It really depends on if they are initiating or if they are playing passively, right? We need to know how to deal with it, and we also need to be okay with being patient and understanding what they want to do. Now we'll move into some endgame boards, right? Here we have a Mew active, attacking a Charizard, right now doing 270 damage with Burning Darkness. We have used 1 Adrenabrain to move 30 onto the active Charizard, and the Charizard is now at 300, right? We want to consider some of the ways that they have to win here, right? They have a Dusclops on the bench, so if we were to bench, let's say, a Ralts, we could easily lose to Dusknoir, our Ralts, and KO the active Mew with their Charizard, right? So we don't want that to happen, right? And it may be scary. You might be saying, well, we only have 1 Gardevoir on the board. What if they KO our Gardevoir? Right? They can use boss's orders to KO our Gardevoir and go down to 1. Right? This is where the concept of preloading energy comes in and how to set up our board to play with lone Gardevoir. Right? Here we have a Mew EX attacking, so we can threaten the Charizard if they decide to KO our Gardevoir, right? But is that enough? Right? Ideally, we need to be KOing this Charizard next turn with the use of Adrenabrain, right? To take a multi-prize turn. But if Mew was our only attacker on the board, we would not be able to take another prize after we KO the Charizard with Adrenabrain, because we would have no good attacks to copy, right? They can leave their board like that and simply wait until next turn to evolve into Charizard and to take their final prize, right? So this is where the Clefairy comes in, right? Because if we look at it from their point of view, what should they KO on our board, right? They can KO the Mew, but then we simply have a Gardevoir in play, so we can use Adrenabrain onto the Charizard to KO it, and Clefairy KOs anything else that's on the board to take our final 3. If they KO Clefairy, well, we have our Gardevoir EX, so we can Adrenabrain and then use Miracle Force onto anything on the bench. In this situation, you know, it's happened a lot to me where I failed to preload energy, right? Let's say the Clefairy is not here. Clefairy is not here. They KO our Gardevoir. We're in trouble, right? Because we have no way to end the game, and they will always end the game on the next turn because we can never we can never take our final 3 prizes, right? So we want to not only stop them from winning, but we also want to be able to win on the next turn, right? This is a crucial concept when we're playing Gardevoir, especially these endgame boards where we need to set up multiple different threats, even though our Gardy might go down. Right? Now, their best play in this situation, right, will be to use Dusclops onto anything and then use a Briar to win the game. But if we're using Iono to 3, they have no Pidgeot in play. This is a difficult card for them to hit, right? So it is okay to play into certain lines. We just need to play into the lines that are most difficult for them to hit, right? So this is a bit the idea. We always want to present attackers, and we always want to present multiple threats that can deal with their board, even if we have no access to Psychic Embrace. So some final notes to keep in mind. Establishing Monkey-Dories are crucial, right? We need them to do everything in this matchup. We need them to pressure Duskulls. We need them to take multi-prize turns. We need them to pressure the Pidgeot with Screamtail, even to pressure Charizard with a Mew EX early, right? When they're on 3 prizes, we can double Adrenabrain and use Genome Hacking to copy Burning Darkness for 270, right? So Monkey Dories are essential. Always prioritize these, especially with the Energize. Mind Bend is a strong option into Zard if we have no better play, right? I mentioned before how they have easy access to Confusion outs with Jet, but it is okay to force them to quick search for Jet, as we want to make sure that in the later stages they are not prepping for a game-ending combo, right? And then, as I mentioned, we always want to Energize onto Monkey Dory. Another point is that Iron Bundle can actually be pretty good to force resources out of them after they used Evo, right? So if they have a Tatsugiri in the active, they attach an energy, they use TM Evolution, and then we can maybe use Iron Bundle to push that energy out of the active, and maybe they promote something that they need to then attach to retreat, right? So be careful of this and keep this in mind. This is, I think, the most crucial match. This is, I think, the most crucial piece of the puzzle here, right? It is important to be patient, right? We do not want to take the first prize unless we are absolutely crippling their board, right? Think KOing Lone Pidgeotto, acceptable first prize, right? KOing the Pidgeot, acceptable way to take the lead, right? But otherwise, giving them CC and access to supporters is simply too strong, and we can never let it happen, right? So that's why we want to maintain a 1 prize board and kind of play a game of chicken, right? Who will initiate? Who's going to take the lead? Well, it won't be us, right? Unless we think that we can have a strong chance to win, even if they take a big 3 prize turn. So just to quickly summarize what we saw in this matchup, make sure to be patient, do not give them access to CC, and always make the best play that makes their board weakest, right? We want to always focus Pidgeot, and we want to always build our board in which we can force the most resources out of them and really force them to draw well off Ionos with minimal draw engine on board. The next matchup we have here is going to be Tera Box, right? This is Alejandro Gonzalez Sanchez's 4th place list from Lille. We see some cool inclusions with the Mawile, but other than that, everything is quite standard. Important to note that we should be respecting Iron Bundle in all of these Tera Box matchups, and they have a wide array of attackers, but they will be primarily trying to use Wellspring Ogerpon to take 2 prizes very, very quickly and efficiently. So getting into some of the main concepts, right? Our main goal is to stabilize our board, right? We are trying the whole game to get to Gardevoir EX. If we can get to Gardevoir EX, we are in a very favorable position, right? So this means benching multiple Ralts, trying to put Bravery Charms on our Ralts, doing everything to be able to get to that turn 2 or turn 3 Gardevoir. In the early turns, we always want to end our turn with an active Monkey Dory, right? This is very good because Wellspring Ogerpon does not do 120 damage to the active, right? It does 100 to the active and 120 to the bench. So if we can have something active that does not get KO'd by a Wellspring attack, then we can force more resources out of them, force their Noctowls into finding Boss or Iron Bundle. Another very important thing is that we always want to protect our board from Iron Bundle, right? Oftentimes in the early game, to bench multiple Ralts, we need to put Artisan into play. This means that they have very easy access to Iron Bundle. Now, an easy fix to this situation is to essentially have 1 Monkey Dory active and 1 Monkey Dory on the bench. If they use Iron Bundle, we can simply push up the other Monkey-Dory, forcing them to play boss's orders to take 2 prizes, right? And then the last thing I want to say is that we need to play around Briar, right? Briar is a strong card. They can use Pikachu in combination with Briar, or even Wellspring in combination with Briar, right? So we need to make sure that we are not falling into any Briar traps. A couple more points here. Using an early Screamtail to KO a Hoot Hoot while piling damage onto Fan Rotom is actually quite a strong play, because it allows us to take a 2-prize turn in 2 turns, right? We KO a Hoot Hoot, move 30 onto the Fan Rotom, and the next turn we can double Adrenabrain to the Fan Rotom and KO it, right? But we have to be careful, because we do not want to give easy 2 prizes, right? So if they are very ahead, and if they take another 2-prize turn, it's going to be difficult for us to win. We want to avoid using Screamtail. So we want to use Screamtail to focus their Hoot Hoots when their board is underdeveloped, and we think that them losing a Hoot Hoot will be very detrimental to their setup, right? Mind Bend is one of the best attacks after they use Torrential Pump, because it allows us to Mind Bend the active Wellspring even without Gardevoir in play, and this forces a flip, right? We can, if they KO our 2 Ralts, then we can Mind Bend the active, re-establish the Ralts, and make them flip in order to take another 2 prizes, right? So we always want to prioritize getting an attachment on our Monkey-Dory early, so we can threaten that turn to Mind Bend. Now, a really important concept I talked about a bit before was stabilizing the board, right? Not only stabilizing, but we also want to prepare how to re-establish our board and what our play will be after they use Torrential Pump to take 2 prizes, right? So this comes a bit with the concept of always attaching to Monkey-Dory and always threatening Mind Bend when we don't have access to Gardevoir. Another thing here is that we want to always avoid attacking with Gardevoir EX unless we have to, right? They have multiple ways to take 2 prizes on our Gardevoir. They have Mawile EX, they have Pikachu, and it is very hard to establish multiple Monkey-Dories to full heal our Gardevoir under so much pressure, right? So we always want to be focusing on using Mind Bend and playing essentially a war of attrition, right? The less turns that they take 2 prizes, the more favorable the matchup becomes, right? We want to extend the game as long as possible. The more turns the game goes on, the better it is for us. Here I have some early boards where these are incredibly optimal boards to deal with their early Torrential Pump. On the left, we see the absolute best board, right? In this situation, it is impossible for them to take 2 prizes. Now, I will say that this is somewhat of a high roll, as we have hit our 2 Bravery Charms on the first turn, as well as 2 Monkey-Dories, right? If we have this, we are almost guaranteed to get into a Gardevoir if we can find Candy Gardy on the next turn. This board is also very resilient to Iron Bundle, because if they use Iron Bundle, we can push up our other Monkey-Dory, and they still have no way to take 2 prizes. On the right here, we see our second best board, right? This is a board that is easier to get to than the Double Charm, but it is still quite difficult to get 3 Ralts down and a Monkey-Dory early. But in any case, if we have 3 Ralts on the board, even if they wipe out 2, we can always have an option to go into Gardevoir on the next turn. What do we do if one of our Ralts is prized, right? This happens often, as we all know. We often have a Ralts prized and can only bench a maximum of 2. So, in this situation, we need to prepare our board in order to deal with the Wellspring threat after they KO our 2 Ralts. So, we have our Monkey-Dory active with a Dark, and we have Energize onto our Enamorus, right? Now, Enamorus is interesting in this matchup because we do need to match types in order to get the full value, right? To hit 200. They often have Latias in play, so this will automatically be a type match. But we can also match the Wellspring's type with the use of Iron Bundle, right? Both water types. So in this situation, if they were to boss and KO both of our Ralts, we are threatening two things. We are threatening using Mind Bend with the active Munkidori, right? We can Mind Bend the Wellspring while we reestablish. Or we can hit 200 into the Wellspring while also presenting an active Pokemon that does not get KO'd by Torrential Pump, right? These are both very, very strong, and a key concept when you're playing with this deck, especially against this matchup, is that we always want to present threats even without Gardevoir EX on board. This would be another example of a strong board, considering that Ralts is prized. Now, instead of using Energize onto Enamorus, we can actually Energize onto Lily's Clefairy. Now, Lily's Clefairy provides a lot of value because it actually threatens the Wellspring Ogerpon immediately by threatening KO, as they often have a very wide bench due to Area 0 underdepths. Now, you may be thinking, why would we be benching a 2-prize liability? Well, the thing is that even if they're able to boss the Clefairy and KO it with another attacker, like a Terapagos, they are not focusing our Ralts, then we can get into a Gardevoir, and we have stabilized our board, right? So this is something very important. Use Lily's Clefairy if we want to get an early KO on the Wellspring. In this situation, we can also threaten a Mind Bend, right? And Mind Bend is one of the best attacks in this matchup, as it really forces a lot of their resources. This is a sample early board, right? They have taken 2 prizes with Torrential Pump. We have managed to get into Gardevoir by either, we had 3 Ralts benched, they take 2 of them. What do we do here, right? So you may be thinking, well, here we could push our Gardevoir EX, we could Adrenabrain 30 and KO the Wellspring, right? But this would leave our Gardevoir with 30 damage on it. Now this is a problem because we want to avoid them getting 2 prize KOs. We also want to avoid leaving 2 prizers in the active, right? Because even in this situation, they have a way to KO our Gardevoir if we KO the Wellspring by using Teal Dance, and then benching Pikachu, using Crispin onto the Pikachu, and then using Energy Switch, right? Quite feasible combo. They have a Fez, they have multiple Hoot Hoots down, so it's really not that unreasonable for them to hit this. So we want to avoid doing this, because if they go down another 2 prizes, it's quite hard for us to win, especially since they will be taking our Gardevoir off the board. So in a situation like this, it's best to simply Mind Bend, right? We Mind Bend, we move the 20 damage that we Psychic Embrace to the active, we can move it to the Fan Rotom, thinking about taking a prize on the Fan Rotom in multiple turns, and we can pressure the Wellspring, right? This leaves them with not that many options, right? They can retreat and Turo and try and attach and E-switch, but it really pulls a lot of resources out of them, and they also don't have a very good way to take 2 prizes, right? So this is the name of the game. Stop them from taking 2 prizes, keep mind bending, keep playing the war of attrition. This is an example of what happens when we mind bend, right? Instead of attacking with Gardevoir, we don't go aggressive, we're patient. We're going to Mind Bend the active, move 20 to the Rotom, and as you see, it's quite a difficult position for them to play, right? They can attempt to Sob under Confusion, they can attempt to use another attacker, but from their side of the board, they have very weak options, right? No ways to take multiple prizes, and difficult for them to use Crispin and Boss, right? They cannot use Crispin and Boss, so they have to rely on E-Switch and other methods to charge up attackers. In this situation, we can actually just keep mind bending, right? We have to wait for what they do, right? Let's say if they just pass, then we can just mind bend again, right? We're not under any pressure to end the game quickly because we know that the longer the game goes on, the more favored they will be, right? Every Noctowl they use is way stronger for us in the late game, right? All the resources that they're using really, really makes our late game and our disruption cards much, much more powerful. I also mentioned the Enamorous attack, right? In this situation, it is quite good to use Enamorous to take a KO on the Wellspring, right? They have a Latias, so we're matching types. But be careful in this situation, because if they are able to get off another Wellspring attack on the next turn, right? So E-Switch, Crispin, bench another Wellspring with a Teal Dance, they can actually take 2 prizes by KOing our Enamorous and our Munkidori, right? This does stretch a lot of resources, but we have to think that they can easily end the game with an Ursaluna or a Mawile or using Sob to lock something for a turn. So I would suggest going for plays like this when you deem that their board is weak, right? When they have an underdeveloped board, they do not have any support Pokemon, minimal Hoot-Hoots, right? It's good to pressure them when we think that they don't have a good follow-up. If their board is strong, I would avoid doing this and I would simply just mind bend. In a situation like this, right? This is following the last situation where we KO'd the Wellspring with Enamorous, and then they are able to set up another Wellspring attack by using E-Switch and Crispin. Now, what should we do here, right? So we have a few options. We need to stop them from taking 2 prizes. This is absolutely sure, right? So we do not want to give them access to Ursaluna. Therefore, we will not be taking a KO this turn, right? So, good place here will be hitting into the Wellspring for 190 with Gardevoir EX, using Mind Bend on the Wellspring while moving 20 onto the Fan Rotom and setting ourselves up for a win in a few turns. Or we can also target a Hoot-Hoot with Screamtail, but then again, be careful. Crispin E-Switch wins them the game as well if we don't find a Bravery Charm, right? So it's always important to evaluate these positions. And in a board like this, I'd say we are quite favored. We just have to make sure to never go down to 2 and not give them access to Ursaluna, and choose our appropriate attacker. Here we have an interesting puzzle. Similar situation to what we had before. We're at 4 prizes. We have Mind Bended the active twice, so that it has 120. We've already drawn. We can't use Fez, and we have nothing relevant prized, right? We have 3 Psychic Energy in the discard pile and 1 Dark. This is our hand. Can you find the winning line? Right? There is a way to win this turn, right? Think about all of your attacking options. Think about how to take 4 prizes, right? So, in this situation, if you figured it out, we need to use our Mew EX, right? We need to use our Mew EX in this situation. If we use Mew EX while using Earthen Vessel for the additional Dark, putting it on the Munkidori, then we can move 6 damage from the Mew onto the Fan Rotom to take the KO, and then use Genome Hacking to copy Torrential Pump to KO both the active Wellspring and a benched Hoot-Hoot or Noctowl, taking a 4-prize turn. This is actually a play that I use a lot, and it's very, very strong in combination with multiple Mind Bends, right? It's not it's not that unlikely that we will be mind-bending a Wellspring multiple times, right? So this 120 here is actually a very common situation. Some final notes to keep in mind about this matchup are that, number one, board stabilization is crucial, and we should always prioritize getting to Gardevoir, right? Nothing else matters. We need to get to Gardevoir EX. Play the resource game, right? Avoid taking KOs to give them access to Fez, right? They have no draw engine. They have to rely on Noctowls if they want to tutor certain cards, right? So if we can stretch their Noctowls, we also make all of their follow-up turns much weaker, as they are weaker into Disruption. Remember supporter debt, right? They cannot use Crispin and Boss in the same turn, right? So if you are KOing their only attacker, they are forced to use E-Switch and have very combo-heavy turns in order to take prizes. They also cannot Boss and Briar, right? So if you're scared about the if you're scared about the Briar play, just ask yourself, do I only lose to Briar if they can also Gust something? In that case, it's just not possible for them to do this, right? And we can easily play around the Briar by setting up for 4-prize turns, right? It's quite easy to go from 6 to 4, and then we take 2 turns to go from 4 to 0. Right? And we have to focus on attacking their energy. As I said before, they cannot accelerate energy and Gust in the same turns. Using Energize early onto Enamorus is quite good, as we saw in the previous boards, as it presents threats. Energize is quite good onto Enamorus early, as it presents a 1-prize threat that can deal with Torrential Pump, right? But we have to also be careful, because we do not want to give them easy access to 2 prizes, right? This is why bench management and not benching extra liabilities is key. We only have 1 counter catcher, right? So we really want to save this for late game scenarios where we can full heal a Gardevoir EX, hit 190 into a 2-prizer, and then go from 4 to 0 the next turn with the use of CC and Adrenabrain. This is a play that is fundamental to Gardevoir, and this is actually one of the reasons why the deck is so strong, is because it decides when it wants to take prizes. So remember this. And as we saw in the previous board, Mew can be very good to take multi-prize turns after a few Mind Bends. So the next matchup we'll talk about will be the Flareon Box matchup. Now this is Emma Hagen's second place list from Gdansk, and we can see that there are quite a few interesting inclusions. Notably, they are playing the Gravity Mountain to be able to OHKO our Gardevoir EX, as well as the Black Belt training, right? So they have a lot of ways to reach into our Gardevoir EX. That means that we are not safe from one-hit knockouts, right? They play very little counts of energy, right? We see only 6 basic energy along with 2 jets. They play the Leafeon EX and Wellspring Ogerpon, right? 2 Boss, 2 Crispin, as well as the Briar. So these are all things that we have to keep in mind while we are navigating the situation. As well as Glass Trumpet and E-Switch are very important cards to be aware of, as they can really create attackers seemingly out of nothing. Main concepts here. As we just discussed in the Tera Box matchup, our focus is on stabilizing our board. If we get to Gardy, we are favored. Right? In the early turns, we always want to end with a Pokemon in the active that does not get KO'd by Torrential Pump, forcing them to either use a Flareon to attack and KO our Munkidori, or forcing them to use Gust to take multi-prize turns. As I said before, we want to always play around Briar. And another important thing is that, unlike Tera Box, it's actually easier for Flareon Box to KO our Gardevoir EX, so we really want to avoid ever attacking with Gardevoir unless absolutely necessary. In terms of Leafeon EX, right? Leafeon EX does 60 times the amount of energy on your opponent's side of the board. So if we have more than 5 energies, Leafeon EX one hit KOs our Gardevoir. So be careful, right? We can have 2 Monkey Dories and an attacker with 3 energy. That's okay. But we also have to be careful because they play Gravity Mountain and they also play Black Belt's Training, right? So this is a matchup where attacking with a Gardevoir is very dangerous and should be avoided. Mew EX is one of your strongest attackers, as we can copy Flareon's second attack, Carnelian, to do 280, KOing it in 1 hit. And we can also use it at some times to copy the Wellspring attack, but also Leafeon. Right? Oftentimes they will use Burning Charge as their first attack for 1 prize card on our active Monkey Dory, let's say, while charging up a Wellspring or another attacker on the bench. Right? From this situation, it is actually quite easy for us to prize trade them, as we have access to easy 1-hit KOs with Mew EX. Right? Mind Bend is also quite strong, but not as strong as you would think because they have Pidgeot and access to multiple Jet Energy, so we should be using Mind Bend really when we have no other better options. Same thing in Tera Box. We have our optimal boards to protect ourselves from Wellspring Ogerpon. On the left, double Bravery Charm and double Monkey Dory protects us from a 2-price KO. And on the right, we have triple Ralts, allowing us to get into Gardevoir on the next turn no matter what. Same thing here. If one of our Ralts is prized, we want to present on-board threats, right? So we want to threaten a Mind Bend. We also want to threaten a Love Resonance attack. We want to be able to do damage while we are reestablishing our Ralts, right? Same thing for Clefairy. We want to be able to threaten damage and maybe even threaten a KO depending on how big their bench is by using Energize to load up a Clefairy, and then we can hit for damage or take KOs even while we are reestablishing our Ralts, right? This is the name of the game. Stabilize the board, present 1 prize or 2 prize threats that can attack even without access to Psychic Embrace. Here's a typical board where they are completely set up. They have taken 1 with Burning Charge. They have charged up Terapagos, and we need to respond, right? Our best response here will be Mew EX copy Carnelian, right? This is very strong because not only does it protect our Gardevoir, as even if they KO our Gardevoir, we have a charged up Mew attacking, but it also allows us to jump ahead in the prize race. As you can see here, this is what would happen after we do this play. We always want to move 30 damage onto Rotom, right? Because we want to be able to focus on the concept of we want to move damage onto the Fan Rotom here because we want to play into the concept of permanence, right? Fan Rotom cannot evolve into anything with higher HP, so it can't. So Hoot Hoot wouldn't be a good target because they can evolve to Noctowl and stop us from taking a KO on it in 2 turns. The only way they can remove it is with Turo, which they do not play, or they can bump their own stadium, right? So Fan Rotom is the easiest thing to pile damage onto, as it is somewhat permanent on the board, right? This is something very important to understand when we're using Adrenabrain. We do not want to Adrenabrain onto things that can change their HP or have tools to boost their HP or evolve, right? We want to focus on the permanency of this Fan Rotom. Now here we KO'd, we took 2 prizes. What is their response here, right? A reasonable response would be for them to use Terapagos and to KO our Mew, right? They don't really have a better response. Hard for them to threaten the Gardevoir. And we can play around this in a few ways, right? In this situation, they have KO'd our Mew with Terapagos. We know that they do not play Turo, right? Emma's list did not play Turo. Here, they are on odd prizes, so they can easily use Briar to end the game if we were to take 2 prizes, so we are going to avoid that. The idea here is that we want to set up checkmate in 2 turns, right? 2 attacks, 4 prizes, all taken on the second turn. If you have any ideas, think about this, right? How can we set up checkmate on this turn, right? So an example of this would be we can hit into the Terapagos with our Gardevoir for 220 damage with an Adrenabrain, right? This puts the Terapagos at 10 HP left. And something that is incredibly important here is that we need to bump the stadium, right? In the previous board, they have an area 0 at the underdepths, right? This means that if they were to bump their own stadium with a Gravity Mountain, they can then discard all of their liabilities, preventing us from taking the 4-prize turn, right? But on this turn, if we find the stadium bump, it is impossible for them to remove their board of liabilities, as they cannot play another area 0 and also Gravity Mountain, right? They cannot do that. So in this situation, we hit into the Terapagos for 220, and the Hoot Hoot has 30, right? They can KO our Gardevoir with a Black Belt's Training and a Flareon attack, but we essentially have game on board, right? We can copy Carnelian with Mew EX to KO the Flareon, as well as using Adrenabrain to KO the Terapagos for our last 4 prizes, right? Some final notes to keep in mind. Very similar themes to the Tera Box matchup. Board stabilization is crucial. We should always prioritize it. Mew EX is a really insane attacker in this matchup, trades amazingly well with Flareon, so keep that in mind. They have many damage modifiers, right? Avoid attacking with Gardevoir EX. It is quite easy for them to KO our Gardevoir, right? They can even use Ursaluna plus Black Belt's Training plus Gravity Mountain to hit 280, right? They have many, many ways to KO our Gardevoir. We want to avoid using it. I mentioned this before, but be careful of Trumpet, E-Switch, Attach, Boss, right? They can really charge up an attacker out of nowhere and take 2 prizes when we didn't think they would be able to, right? Leafeon with 6 energy on our board KOs a Gardevoir EX, so keep that in mind. Supporter debt is very important in this matchup. They cannot Boss and Briar, so make sure to keep that in mind while we're planning our turn. And we also really want to keep track of their resources, right? Here's where list knowledge comes into play, right? We always want to be knowledgeable about the general 60 cards that most archetypes are playing, right? If we know this, we can easily play around certain plays. For an example, against Flareon, we know that they only run 2 Crispins, right? So even if they are getting very ahead with multiple torrential pumps, at a certain point, they really do run out of steam and struggle to set up attackers, right? Similarly to the Tera Box matchup, we really want to play the War of Attrition, right? Make them use their Noctiles, make them use their resources. Even with Pidgeot in play, they struggle to set up strong attackers and to close the game if they do not have Crispin or are lacking certain key resources, right? Skipping the Briar turn will also be very important. Similarly to what I discussed in the Tera Box matchup, Oftentimes we go from 6 to 4 and then 4 to 0. So just to conclude, very important to, again, stabilize our board. Keep in mind that MewEX is really broken in this matchup. Track the resources, right? This should be seen by checking their discard pile every turn, right? We want to always make sure of what they have available to them, right? And the last thing I want to say is that this matchup is quite favored, but it is quite easy for them to run away with the game by using multiple torrential pumps if we don't have a good setup. So make sure to prioritize your board stability. All right, so let's get into the matchup against Marnie's Grimmsnarl. Here for the sample list, we have Kieran Farrah's 79th placed list from Lil. Quite standard here. Notable inclusions are the 1 copy of Rare Candy, as well as the 3-2 Frostlass line with the 4 Monkey Dory and Shaman. All right, so in general, we just have to be careful about a few things, which I will outline below. Some of the key concepts here. So in this matchup, we can use Turbo Energize to quickly gain a Monkey Dory lead, right? This is going to be very strong because we're going to pressure multiple pieces on their board, and it's going to allow us to deal with Grim much easier. In the early game, they're always going to try and use TM Evolution to get up 2 more Grims, and hopefully have a Shaman on their board as well. Now, if they do not have Shaman, it is essential to always focus KOing the Morgrim, as every Grim piece we KO makes our mind bends and our general game plans in the later stages of the game much easier to pull off. Enamorus is interesting in this matchup. Quite a strong attacker to 2-shot a Grim, although we want to be careful about leaving them with so much damage on board. So I would say that Enamorus is very situational and can be a good Energize target, but we should prioritize Monkey Dory. Another point is that I see a lot of players putting extra Ralts and extra Gardevoirs into play when it is not necessary, right? Ralts has 70 HP. This is easily KO'd by double Monkey Dory with a Shadow Bullet. So we really want to evaluate our position and see whether or not we really need that second Gardevoir, and if there's a way to preload energy to protect us from a Gust KO on our Gardevoir EX. All right. The main goal of this matchup is going to be to work towards them having a lone Grim board, right? If they only have 1 Grimmsnarl in the active attacking with maybe an Impidimp on the bench and no more Grims, each one of our Mind Bend attacks is going to be incredibly strong because we're going to force them to flip, right? And you may think, okay, flipping 50-50, right? But actually, in a lot of situations, 50-50 odds are fantastic, right? If we would be unfavored to lose the game, maybe 20-30% that we're going to win, creating a 50-50 in that position is actually very, very, very strong. A couple of other points here. We want to avoid ever giving them access to Countercatcher unless we are crippling the board, right? So think about KOing a Morgrim. Think about KOing their only necessary or their only strong Pokemon on the board, right? Because Grimmsnarl has no engine. They have no engine, they really rely on supporters to draw cards and to set up. In situations where we force them to use Boss, that means they are not setting up their board, and there's surely something that we can take advantage of. Right? Another strong play, since we have TM Turbo Energize, we can often get to 2-3 monkeys quite early in the game. Now they will have Shaman on their bench protecting all of their smaller Grim pieces, but a really cool play we can do is we can set up for a triple monkey onto Shaman, KOing it with Adrenabrain, and then we're able to use Screamtail on whatever target is strongest. Something I see also is, for example, if they evo into 2 Morgrims and then we have a 1 Prizer active, they tend to sometimes evolve into Grimm, put energies on Morgrim and Grimm, and then KO our active 1 Prizer with Morgrim. Right? This may seem like a strong play as they're presenting a 1 Prize active, but we can heavily punish them by attacking into their Morgrim and KOing it with a Clefairy plus Charm. Right? They will not have damage on their board to use with Adrenabrain, and our Clefairy and Charm survive a Shadow Bullet attack, allowing us to take a prize on Morgrim, and then allowing us to hit into Grimmsnarl or do something else. We should only put down Artisan if we absolutely need to, right? They do not have many ways to find Monkey Dory and Shaman without the use of Artisan or simply drawing into it with a supporter, right? So unless we absolutely need to, let's keep Artisan off the board until later stages of the game. Something that should not be undermined is how strong Mew EX is as an attacker, right? Since we're setting up early Monkey Dories, 2-3 Monkey Dory with Dark, we often have 90 damage available with Adrenabrain. Now this is very important because we can actually use Mew to copy Shadow Bullet while putting 90 damage onto a Monkey Dory and then KOing that Monkey Dory. Right? This is very strong because this allows us to get damage into Grimm with our Mew, KO a Monkey Dory, but also this protects our Gardevoir because we have an attacking threat in Mew that if the Grimmsnarl uses Gust on Gardevoir EX, we can just return KO it with another Shadow Bullet from Mew EX. I mentioned this a bit before, but playing on one Gardevoir line is crucial in this matchup, right? We need to make sure to preload attackers, and we also need to make sure to evaluate situations in which it might seem tempting to bench a second Ralts, but we might not actually need it. This is an example of our first turn optimal board, right? We have some Ralts, we have some Monkey Dory, and we have Energize onto 2 of them. They have a perfect setup. They have Shaman, double Morgrim with a Monkey Dory active. Now there are 2 paths, right, that we have to evaluate. If they initiate with a Grimm attack, right? So let's say they go evolve into Grimmsnarl, charge some energy, KO our active Ralts, move some damage to the bench. What's our response? And then there's also the other side of the coin, right? If they choose to not initiate and set up more Monkey Dories and build their board a bit stronger, how should we approach that situation? So if they choose to initiate, right? In this situation, they have KO'd our Ralts with a Grimmsnarl, and it's our turn, right? So here, we may seem behind, because we kind of are, but we have a lot of options available to us, right? As you can see, we already have 2 Monkey Dories charged up, so we're 1 Monkey Dory away from being able to Adrenabrain KO the Shaman. This is maybe somewhat of a high roll play, but it's a play that we need to keep in mind, because if we are able to somehow get triple Monkey Dory onto the Shaman, KO it, and then use Scream Tail to KO the Morgrim, even if they take a 3-prize turn next turn, we are in a very favorable position because we will be forcing them to flip through Mind Bend, right? Other strong plays will be Mind Bending the active, right? Forcing out the Air Balloon, forcing out a retreat, just making it more difficult for them and stretching the resources, right? We can use Countercatcher and KO a Morgrim, right? The Morgrim on the bench, we can KO it with a 1-prizer. Think Enamorous, think even Mind Bend plus double Adrenabrain. We can also hit into the active Grimm with an Enamorous, right? So we can do 200 to the active, move some damage onto either Shaman, move some damage onto Morgrim, and force them to make a choice, right? They can boss KO our Gardevoir, take 2 prizes, but the Enamorous is still on board and will KO their Grimm, and we can move some more damage with Adrenabrain, right? So this is also a pretty strong play. And we can really decide what to do based on the board, right? So just keep in mind the strong attacks, Mind Bend, Screamtail, and Clefairy and Amorous, right? Those are the strong attacks that don't necessarily get one-shot by Grim and really disrupt what they're trying to do, right? They're trying to use a supporter and take many KOs in a turn. What happens if they choose to not initiate, right? If they evolve into the Grimmsnarl, set up their board, maybe attach to another Munkidori, what do we do here, right? We're kind of playing a waiting game. But you remember how I mentioned we really do not want to go ahead in the prize race because them being able to use Counter Catcher is really, really strong because they can use a Lily's Determination and then also Counter Catcher, which gives them a huge card advantage. Now here we have a few options, right? We have energized onto Munkidori the previous turn, but our board doesn't really present itself with many strong plays that we can do on this turn, right? So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to take another turn off and we're going to energize onto the Enamorous, right? Now this provides a one prize option that if they decide to initiate, we can hit into the Grim with an Enamorous while not having a two prizer in play, right? This can be quite scary because we will have our Ralts line threatened by Shadow Bullet and double Adrenabrain, but if they take one, we can also use our Counter Catcher to maybe KO a Morgrim with an Amorous or Shaman or a Munkidori, right? In this board here, we're also threatening a Mind Bend, right? If they KO the active, we can promote Munkidori, attach Psychic, and Mind Bend, right? The more flips we can force them to make, the more often some of those flips will land on tails, right? So we can Mind Bend here, we can Enamorous hit it into the Grim, but this is just to illustrate some of the options that we have when they're not initiating and how we should always be patient and we should not choose to go ahead, because if we go ahead, we give them CC and things get scary very, very fast. Some endgame thoughts to keep in mind. While the boards that I have showed you are somewhat general and very early game, it is difficult in some senses to create boards that are optimal because the matchup has so many moving pieces, there's so many damage counters flying everywhere, and it also depends on how well both players are drawing, right? Iono and Mind Bend, even in the mid game, is incredibly strong, right? If they have taken 2 prizes and they're at 4 prize cards, if we can Mind Bend and Iono, very unlikely that they will have a strong turn, right? Remember, their deck has no engine, they have no way to draw cards, so they are very reliant on using supporters to draw. If we have our Counter Catcher available during the end game, a play that I like to make is I CC something that cannot retreat, so think about a Shaman or an Impidimp or even a Frostlass. And then I'm going to use Iono them down to 2 cards, and we can use Roaring Scream onto Grimmsnarl in an attempt to win in the next turn, right? We always want to be careful about using Screamtail. We always want to try to manipulate the damage in a way that we can prevent them from using Adrenabrain to KO it, right? So think about those lines. Late game, they often struggle even to find a Dark Energy, and if they have to Gust as well, well, very difficult. They have to draw into Boss Energy out of the Iona to 2, right? Another point is that often in the end game, right, benching another Ralts is really illegal because Ralts has 70 HP. It will get KO'd by double Adrenabrain and Shadow Bullet, right? They can easily take 3 prize turns due to the low HP of Ralts, right? Boss Gardevoir EX, double Adrenabrain onto Ralts, KO, take 3 prizes, our board is in shambles, right? What we have to realize is that if we are Ionoing them to 2 or 3 cards, even 4 cards, right? And they just have one of their 2 boss in hand, they boss KO Gardy, well, Ralts would not be saving us there, right? Ralts would be actually just making us lose faster. So what we have to understand is if they have the boss off a low Iono, they have it, right? That's okay, right? That's okay, and that will happen. This is Pokemon after all, right? And another point is that oftentimes our Bravery Charms will go to Munkidori, right? If they are spreading damage with their own Munkidoris onto our Munkidoris and we're somehow behind, we might need to give our Munkidori a bit of an HP boost to survive multi-prize turns with Shadow Bullet, right? And the last thing that I want to mention is we don't want to donate damage onto their side of the board, as they actually have no way to generate damage themselves apart from Frostlass. But they do not want to put Frostlass into play because, well, we play TM Turbo Energize and we will actually overrun them with monkeys, right? So we want to avoid hitting into Grim unless we are in some situations like I outlined before with the Enamorous or we are mind bending. Otherwise, we always want to use something called lost zoning damage, right? We can choose what we're going to KO, right? Let's say we were going to CC and KO a Morgrim with our Enamorous, right? Instead of moving damage onto Shaman or Monkey or something, we can also move it onto the Morgrim and simply just heal our board, right? Now, this isn't as important if they don't have many Munkidoris established because we can actually take advantage of that damage. But if their board is very set up, we often want to simply heal our board and not give them any extra. So, just to summarize, right, we want to focus on our strong attackers in this matchup, mainly Munkidori's Mind Bend. We have Clefairy, Screamtail, and Enamorous, right? Those are our main attackers. We want to be focusing on KOing Morgrim, right? Every small Grim piece that we KO makes our Mind Bends on following turns much, much stronger, right? We want to not donate damage, and we want to be careful about how many Ralts we bench, and we want to make sure that we're preloading attackers in order to deal with threats, right? So keep these things in mind while you're practicing the matchup, because it is a matchup that is very dependent on both players' draws, and also it's very difficult to evaluate certain situations because of the complexity of the damage flying back and forth, right? So just focus on the fundamentals we've seen here and hope they flip tails. All right, so the next matchup we have here is going to be Ceruledge. The sample list I have here is Stephen Lowe's 38th place Brisbane list, and here are the important cards that we need to be careful of when we're playing this matchup. They have only 2 copies of Boss's Orders, 2 Turo Scenarios, they have a Legacy Energy, and they also have 2 Jamming Towers. We have to also be careful about the Iron Bundle, as this will affect how we play our early game, right? So let's get into the key concepts. One of our strongest attackers in this matchup is going to be Mew-EX copying Raging Amethyst, because it's the best way to KO a Ceruledge. Yes, Ceruledge actually does have a second attack, funny enough, that hits for 280 and discards 3 energy, right? So this synergizes with Mew-EX. We can Genome Hacking, KO the Ceruledge, and also not have the energy trapped onto Mew, right? So we can generate more damage. They're often forced to bench Squawk in the early game to set up and to get energy in the discard. So we really want to prioritize KOing the Squawk with a 4 energy Screamtail before they can Turo it, right? Our first two prizes ideally are always going to be KO Squawk. We also need to play around Briar, right? So in other matchups, I've talked about going from 6 to 4 and 4 to 0. Same kind of idea here. We need to skip Briar turn. And if we do whiff early Gardevoir EX, Mind Bend is also quite good, as it forces a Jet Energy out of them or Turo to attack without flipping. And oftentimes, even if they whiff and they flip tails, we often simply just win the game on the spot, right? Monkey Dory is broken. So here's an example board where they went first. We got a couple of Ralts down, a Monkey Dory down, and they have KO'd our active Monkey Dory, right? So in this situation, our goal is always to work towards a 4-energy Screamtail to KO the Squawk ability, right? Simple and straightforward, right? We can see here, we managed to get into a Gardevoir, right? They're taking a KO, so we can use Lilies, we can bench Fez, and we can draw 11 cards, hopefully find Candy Gardevoir with necessary energy in the discard, and then we can KO Squawk. And then we can KO Squawk for 2 prizes, right? Now, another option is if we aren't able to go into Screamtail, we can use Mew to KO the active Ceruledge, copying Raging Amethyst to go down to 4 prizes while they're at 5, right? But this does leave a 2-prizer in the active, so they do not need Boss to take 2 prizes on the next turn, which means they will be on odd, and that we will have to skip Briar. Very important part of this matchup is that they will try and use Legacy, and they will try and use Briar to offset the prize exchange, right? To come back from maybe situations in which they're a bit behind. So in a situation like this, where we attacked with Mew, we're at 4, they KO'd our Mew to go down to 3, and in a situation like this, we cannot take 2 prizes, right? If we take 2 prizes, they will simply just Briar and KO a 2-prizer, right? For 3 total prizes. So here we have to play around Legacy, which means that we have to use our Adrenabrain to KO the Ceruledge on our next turn. And we also have to set up for another 2-prize KO, right? So an example here is that we need to hit the Ceruledge for damage, right? We need to hit it for minimum 240, right? Because if we hit it for 240, then 130 damage Adrenabrain will KO the Ceruledge on the next turn, and then we can even use our Counter Catcher or another way to take another 2 prizes, right? So we want to either hit with Gardevoir, right? 190 plus double Monkey Dory is going to be 250, which is completely fine. We can win on the next turn. Or we can also use something like Enamorus, right? Enamorus, they have a Fez on board. We can bench our Fez and then use Enamorus for 200, double Monkey onto the Ceruledge, put it to 260, and then we can win with Counter Catcher onto Fez and Dippity, use 1 Monkey Dory onto the Ceruledge to KO it, 1 Monkey Dory onto the Fez, and then use Miracle Force for 190, right? Here it's also quite strong to attack with a 1-prizer, because if they are not able to use Boss, we actually get an extra turn. If they have Turo here, right, they can Turo the Pheasantipity, but they must evolve the other Ceruledge so that they don't lose all of their energies, and they also don't lose the legacy energy, right? So we just have to be careful of what kind of options they have, and often when we Iono them down to a couple cards, it's difficult for them to draw Turo, and we have to remember supporter debt. They cannot Turo and Boss, or Turo and Briar, or do any combination like that, right? So we always want to look for an easy way to take 2 prizes, and then play around Briar if necessary, with Adrenabrain and Counter Catcher. Here are some of the final notes to keep in mind. We should always be aware of how many energies they have in the discard, right? This is going to affect what attacker you use. In some situations, when they have maybe a slow start, we can actually go in with a Gardevoir if we don't think that they will be able to reach 310, right? This is also interesting because, for example, if I have a Munkidori active and I have a Charm in my hand and I see that they maybe only have about 80-90 damage in their discard pile, we can maybe charm it, maybe force them to use some more resources, right? Discard some more cards, get some more energy. Energize is not particularly crucial in this matchup, but accelerating our Munkidoris is never a bad option, right? Remember supported at, I just briefly talked about it. They can't use Boss and Briar, they can't Boss and Turo, they can't Briar and Turo, right? So when we're playing around these late game situations, we just have to evaluate, okay, can they win with Briar here if I push a one prizer? No, because they can't Boss and Briar. Can they stop us from winning on the next turn with Turo? Maybe they can, but if they don't Boss this turn, aren't they a weak situation, right? So we just have to think about what supporter is best for them on their turn and how we should approach it, right? And then, similar to what I just had in the last slide, we're going to play around Legacy Energy by taking the KO with Adrenabrain. As I also previously talked about, Mind Bend is great if we miss a Gardevoir EX, right? This has happened to me in tournaments where, you know, the game is proceeding as normal. I have some Ralts down, I use Lily, I use Fez, I whiff Gardevoir EX, right? But I'm going to have a Munkidori with an energy, as this is what we're going to prioritize in almost every matchup. And then we're going to Mind Bend the Ceruledge, right? If they don't hit Jet, they have to flip, right? If they flip Tails, then we get another chance to get Gardevoir, and the position is incredibly favorable for us, right? Another mistake that I see some people do is on the first attacking turn that we have, we really want to focus Squawk, right? You might think, okay, well, there's a Ceruledge in the active, I can just use Mew to KO it, get rid of their piece, right? But this is actually a big mistake, because we need to KO the Squawk before they're able to Turo it, right? If they can use Turo to prevent us from taking an advantage, we want them to be using Turo on their Ceruledge pieces, because this slows down how fast they are at setting up the next ones, right? And in a late game situation where they have a Legacy energy on their Ceruledge, we also can force them to Turo that, thus removing the Legacy energy from play, right? And then also we're going to skip the Briar turn by doing the classic 6-4 and then 4-0 with the use of our Counter Capture. So just to sum up, focus is on getting a Gardevoir and KOing the Squawk ability. Another important thing is that they can attack with Zoroark, so we want to not only end our turn with a Munkidori active to prevent the Zoroark KO, but we also want to play around Iron Bundle by benching another Munkidori and multiple Ralts, right? If they're able to take early KOs, this is bad for us, as if we go behind too many prizes, similarly to the Gholdengo matchup, it is difficult for us to win because they reach thresholds where they are simply KOing everything on board, right? So stick to the plans, make sure to KO Squawk, use Mew EX to KO the Ceruledge, and use Adrenabrain in combination with some of our other attackers to skip the Briar turn, right? So keep these in mind when you're practicing this matchup. This is a very favored matchup if we can set up, right? Most of the games that we are going to lose against Ceruledge are because they get 2 prizes ahead because we whiffed Gardevoir EX. The next matchup we're going to talk about is Absol Box. The sample list I have here is Ryuki Okada's first place Brisbane list. This is a really, really cool list, has a lot of very nice inclusions. We see an absence of Cornerstone Ogerpon, which means that they're playing cards like Airy, cards like Zoroark, Enhanced Hammer, and they have the Mist Energies as well as the 2 Eviltalls, right? So the most important things to be aware of in this matchup are Mist Energy that protects their Mega Absol from getting genome hacked and terminal perioded. We want to be careful of their hand disruption cards, right? They have Claw of Darkness, Airy, Zoroark, so our hand is never safe. There's a 1 of Energy Switch, right? So this can let them charge up attackers out of nowhere, as well as the 2 Eviltalls and the multiple Penny, Iono, and Arven, right? Especially with the Eviltall, we want to always be careful about our board and how weak we are to clutch, even though we have Turo, right? Because it's not always easy to find Turo on the exact turn we need it, and oftentimes giving them even just 1 extra turn is enough to swing the game. So, some of the key concepts that I have here will be the biggest one and a recurring theme. We see that Mew-EX is one of our best attackers, right? You may think that, okay, well, Mew-EX is a 2-prizer, it's Dark Weak, it gets one-shot by Absol. While that is true, Mew-EX does a couple of things. The first thing is that using Claw of Darkness against an Absol deck is actually almost stronger than Absol using Claw of Darkness on other decks, right? You have to remember that they do not have much onboard draw, right? They have the Kangaskhan and they have the Pheasantipede, but they do rely on supporters, especially Boss's Orders, right? So if we can use Claw of Darkness, discard a Boss's Orders, this is very, very good for our board, right? We can also use Mew-EX as a shield for our Gardevoir, right? If we have a Mew-EX charged up in the active position attacking, even if they boss KO our Gardevoir EX, we still can 2-shot the Absol, right? So this is very, very important, and this is a concept that you've seen many times over the course of this video, right? Enamorus is an incredible attacker in this matchup, and one of the main reasons why Enamorus is so good is because it's good into all these dark decks, right? So early on, we can go only 1 prize board, right? No Gardevoir EX, use Turbo Energize onto the Enamorus, and threaten hitting into the Absol if they do decide to initiate, right? This is super strong because even if they go 2 prizes ahead, or even 3 prizes ahead, we have to remember that their Absol is worth 3 prizes, right? So we may be behind in prizes, but we're actually ahead on the prize exchange, right? So don't be scared to go down some prizes early if we know we have a strong way to win the game, right? Turo is a very important card. Turo allows us to stabilize our board with Fez and not get clutch locked, right? They're going to be using a lot of disruption, right? Iono, Airy, Zoroark, and Claw of Darkness are all strong options that target our hand. Now, if we have Fez on board, if we have Mew on board, we're much stronger into disruption, right? Doesn't really matter what they discard, we will be drawing. But if we do not have Turo, it's very hard to bench Fez, as they can clutch lock it and set up 4 prize turns very, very easily, right? So just remember this. We always want to be aware of where our Turo is in the deck as well, right? If we have our Turo in hand and we don't want to use it this turn, but we want to be safe from Claw of Darkness, consider using Iono to put it at the bottom, right? We can use our Ionos to protect important resources, such as, you know, a handful of recovery, or maybe an important rare candy, or especially our Turo, right? So we want to always be conscious of the fact that we can actually use our Iono and not draw any more cards, right? If we can maybe, we could Fez on a turn, but we decide not to protect our resources, or we can Mew for that extra card, but maybe we don't want to, right? So we always want to be a bit conscious of where our cards are in the deck and what we need to win the game. As I talked about a bit before, Aries, Rosic, Claw of Darkness are all powerful hand disruption plays. Plan accordingly. Hide cards with Iono. And really, it's crucial that we're able to identify which cards are high priority in which situations, right? And this is hard to learn, but it will come with practice. The more games you play against them, the more comfortable you will get with their patterns. Yveltal Lock, right? Very, very bad for us. So we want to make sure that we have access to Turo on the turn that we use it. And one of the biggest things is that we do not want to give them free countercatcher access, right? Their deck is very reliant on supporters to draw and very reliant on supporters to pull off big power plays. If we can force them to use a boss's orders in order to take 2 prizes, this really stifles how set up their board will be, and it really weakens their follow-up turns, right? So we really need to be careful of giving countercatcher unless we are absolutely crippling their board. This is also a theme that comes up in a lot of the dark matchups, right? Charizard, Grimmsnarl, we really want to avoid giving them countercatcher as their deck is just very, very powerful at using CC in combination with strong supporter cards. Now let's go into some early boards, right? We have 2 kind of paths similar to what we had with Grimmsnarl, right? In this situation, we have used Energize onto our Enamorus. We're presenting a 1 prize board that can hit into an Absol for 200 if they do decide to initiate, right? So if they do initiate, right, let's say on their turn, they go, okay, attach Mist Energy to Absol, Claw of Darkness, Monkey Dory. Our response is very strong, right? We push Enamorus to the active, we hit the Absol for 200, and this kind of puts them in a situation where they have no backup Absol, and we are threatening to KO the Mega Absol on the next turn with Enamorus, right? And even in the situation where we're attacking with an Enamorus, we actually do not need to put a Gardevoir in play, as we want to maintain 1 prize board and stop them from taking 2 prizes, right? They have no way to take 2 prizes unless they are KOing a Gardevoir or another 2 prizer, right? But let's say that they play it more passively and decide to set up their board more, right? Maybe set up a second Absol. If we get the first attacking turn, how should we play it, right? If we're able to get into Candy Gardy early after they energized, what should we do? This is an example of what would happen if they initiate, right? They initiate, KO our Monkey Dory, we can evolve into Kirlia, and then hit the Mega Absol for 200. If we look at their side of the board, they have a lot of issues here, right? They can attempt to maybe Penny their Monkey Dory, heal 60 off the Mega Absol, but we will still KO it on the next turn for sure, right? Even if they kill our Enamorus, we can use a Clefairy, we can use Enamorus in combination with Monkey Dory, right? So we have a lot of options to take 3 prizes. Now they will have taken 1 more prize, so they will be at 4. And even though they're ahead, we will be winning the game as we will be taking 3 prizes this turn, right? So in this situation where they initiate, this is a very, very winning play. Just make sure to develop our Ralts, maybe Ultra Ball for Kirlia, but keep Gardevoir off the board, right? We don't need it. Imagine if in this situation, if they went boss on Gardevoir, take 2 to go down to 3, right? Now we're no longer winning in the prize race. We're actually even, except they have the turn advantage, right? So they can easily end the game with a Petarant or Ursaluna or even a clutch strategy, right? So we want to be careful of these ideas. Now, what if we have the first move to attack, right? We have the first move to attack. What should we do, right? They decide to attach another energy to Absol, start charging up the second Absol, which is important for them because they don't want to be threatened by our attackers, right? If we get the first move to attack, we need to progress our board and put pressure on their charged up Mega Absol without taking a KO, right? This goes back to the point that we really do not want to give them Counter Catcher, and it just enables too many of their power plays, right? So here, what's important is that we can get into a Gardevoir, right? And then we can use Scream Tail to hit the Mega Absol for damage, right? Here we put 3 energies onto our Scream Tail, moved 10 damage onto the Mega Absol, and then hit the Mega Absol for 100, for a total of 110. Now this does a few things, right? This puts pressure on the Absol player to make a move, right? They have to do something this turn, or we will continue to pile damage onto their charged Absols, and even if they're taking prizes here in one way or another, we will still be very ahead in the prize race, right? It's important that we move 10 damage off the Scream Tail, as I've mentioned before, so as not to get KO'd by one Adrenabrain, right? If they want to KO our Scream Tail with Adrenabrain, they are forced to use Penny, right? If they are using Penny, they are not using Boss. Therefore, we can push another 1 prizer, they can take 2 prizes, but then we can KO the Absol, and it's a similar situation to the slide previously, right? Here, also, we have an interesting opportunity to preload, right? As I talked before, Mew EX is one of our strongest attackers, right? Now, a problem we could see here is if they boss KO our Gardevoir in this situation with the Absol, and we are not able to find another Gardevoir, we have a bit of a problem, because we actually cannot threaten the Mega Absol with our active Scream Tail, and we have a lot of energy locked on board. So in this situation, we're going to charge 2 onto Mew, which means that next turn, with 1 attachment, we're going to be able to use Monkey Dory to move 30, and then use Claw of Darkness for a total of 230 damage, where they can only heal 30, so it will always be a KO, right? So we don't actually need to play with the second Gardevoir line. If we whiff, we just almost always want Mew down no matter what, because this also provides a lot of draw stability, right? Restart is very, very good under Claw of Darkness, and we play a lot of cards that discard, so we can often discard our hand down to 0, and then draw 3 with Restart, getting some fresh new cards, right? So be careful of this, and it's important to get damage on their board, progress the board state without taking prizes, right? Here, if we were to KO the Petron, for example, load a bunch of energy onto the Scream Tail, KO the Petron, they have a devastating turn. Counter Catcher Gardevoir, Double Monkey, KO the Scream Tail, KO the Gardevoir, and it's just very hard to win, right? Very, very hard to win because the Absol has no damage, right? We need to always 2-shot the Absol because we have to assume that they have a mist, right? If they don't have a mist, it's much easier to KO the Absol because we can set up 2 Monkey Dories, double Adrenabrain onto the Absol, and then use Genome Hacking to copy Terminal Period, KOing the Absol, right? But we have to think that our Absol opponent will not just go in blind with an Absol if it doesn't have a mist, because if we're able to kill it with Mew, that's very, very dangerous for them, right? Some final notes to keep in mind for the endgame are that we should be careful of even an earlier Blood Moon or Ursaluna with E-Switch, right? So if we're at 3 prizes, right, we want to be careful that they can go attach E-Switch Boss, right? That can easily end the game in a situation where we couldn't have lost otherwise, right? Oftentimes in situations where we're going to have Mew and Fez, and we need to take prizes, a cool play we can do to prevent ourselves from losing to Ursaluna is we can Charm the Fez, Turo the Mew, and we are going to be safe from Ursaluna, right? So keep that in mind. Even if they're only playing with one Absol, we have to remember that Petron DX is a great attacker for them late game because we need to take prizes, right? We need to at least KO one Absol. So at minimum, their Petron EX will be doing 180, which is enough to KO basically anything on our board because of Dark Weakness, right? So this is another attacker that could come out of nowhere, attach E-Switch, and boss for game, right? We also want to think about how they would play their turn and what target they would choose when they're discarding one from your hand, right? You know, if I have a hand that has one very, very strong cards and a bunch of other weaker cards, it's very easy for us to say, okay, they're going to discard this Iono or they're going to discard this Mew, right? So this will often affect how aggressive or passive we're going to play the situation, right? For example, if I have my Turo in my hand and I have 3 prizes left, but I also have an Iono, and I don't want to use the Turo right now because I have Feza on my board, and I needed to use another supporter, or you know, maybe I already used one. In situations where we haven't used a supporter, we can often use the Iono to hide our Turo, right? If we really, really need it for the end game, we can hide important resources with the use of Iono, right? We always want to be thinking about that. They have a lot of ways to disrupt that. Our hand, we always have to be mindful, right? We can even play our hand down to 0 if we have Mew and Fez on board, because this provides a lot of stability and gives them a lot less value for their Claw of Darkness, right? And then the final note here is that, obviously, if they don't have a Misted Absol, Mew EX copying Terminal Period is pretty broken, right? This is just a one-shot on a 3-prizer, and if this ever happens, it's quite hard for us to lose the game, right? Another point that I want to talk about is that in the situation where we get the first move, right? So in the situation where we went Screamtail, put some damage on the Absol, if we chose to do nothing there, the situation gets out of hand very, very quickly, right? Because they can actually use a second Energize, put some energies onto Absol, set up a second Munkidori, and then if we want to put damage onto an Absol, well, it gets completely voided because they're just going to heal it off, right? So it's really, really important that we put pressure on them and we do not let them energize twice. If they get to a board with multiple Munkidoris and multiple Absol set up, it's very, very hard to deal with, right? They're also quite weak to Iono in the late game, right? If we are using Iono and then not taking a KO, they don't have Fez, all they're doing is drawing 2 with Kangaskhan, and they don't have many outs to boss, right? They have Pokegear and they have 3 boss, but they do not have much other board stability other than Kangaskhan, so this is something that we can often abuse, especially if we're using Iono in combination with Claw of Darkness. This is something that they really, really don't want to see, right? Because if they draw 2 or 3, chances are that they will have maybe 1 to 0 good cards in their hand. If they have a Pokegear, we discard the Pokegear, and then they will essentially be top decking for most of the game, right? A lot of the games that we win, we will be 2-shotting a Mega Absol EX, and then we will maybe be KOing a Munkidori, and we will be KOing a final 2-prizer for the game, right? This isn't always the case, but this is a prize map that we want to be aware of and we want to often work towards. Last thing here is that Area and Zoroark are very, very powerful, right? As I talked about before, we can play around this by protecting our cards with Iono, right? So, for example, if we have all of our recovery in our hand and we know that we need a Stretcher to get back to Gardevoir, or we need Stretcher to close out the game with Mew, we need to protect our hand, right? This is something very, very important. If we're looking at our hand and we're saying, oh, if they discard the Stretcher here, I'm going to lose, well, they will probably discard that Stretcher, right? So we have to try and play around it. So just some final closing thoughts. Important to be patient, as with all the dark matchups, right? We want to be pressuring their board and pressuring what they are attaching energy to without taking KOs. And we want to try and maintain a one prize board as long as possible with the use of Energize onto Enamorus to present a threat to the Mega Absol, right? Look for situations to make risky plays, protect our hand with Iono, and when you're practicing, never let them energize twice, right? Always focus on pressuring their board. All right, for the next matchup, I have Joltik Box. Now this is Diego Casiraga's third place list from Belo Horizonte, and here's some interesting things that we need to be careful of, right? So they are playing the Prime Catcher, as well as one Bravery Charm with the classic supporter lineup, and they also are playing the Magneton, right? So this allows them to charge attackers seemingly out of nowhere and can present some interesting checkmate boards for them, right? So as we move into some of the key concepts, right? Iron Bundle is insane in this matchup, right? Oftentimes if they are going to use Joltik to charge energies, they will not have a backup Joltik, as we can really take advantage of that with Adrenabrain, right? Now what we can do is, if we are able to get into Gardevoir EX early on, we can use Iron Bundle to push the Joltik away, and they have to push a 2-prizer, right? If they push a 2-prizer, we can almost always take a 2-prize KO with either Gardevoir and Adrenabrain or the use of Mew EX, right? So this is something that's very, very important. Iron Bundle is insane. Enamorus is also a great attacker, as we can actually KO an Iron Hands that doesn't have a Bravery Charm with 200 plus 30 from Adrenabrain, right? They often have to have Latias in play, so we can easily match the types, right? This is another matchup where we want to focus on winning in 3 attacks, right? In all of these turbo matchups, the theme is that we want to be winning in 3 attacks in combination with Adrenabrain, so we should have a very clear idea of how we're going to take all 6 prizes from the start of the game. If we're able to establish an early Gardevoir, even maybe before they use Ampu very much, we are incredibly favored, right? Their deck struggles to set up multiple attackers while also struggling to OHKO our Gardevoir EX, right? As shown here, when we have a full healed Gardevoir, it's a really great attacker, right? If we have 2 Monkey Dories, we can full heal our Gardevoir when we put 60 on it, and it's very hard for them to ever hit over 300 damage. Now, another interesting thing is that we can actually hit into an Iron Hands for damage, right? Let's say we Iron Bundle and they push the Iron Hands. We can actually hit into it with our Gardevoir and then use Mew EX to copy Ampu very much for an easy 3 prizes, right? This allows us to set up some interesting prize maps like a 1-3-2 or 3-1-2 or something like that, right? So still maintaining the theme of winning in 3 attacks. This is an example early board, right? They have used Jolting Charge onto the Iron Hands, and we're able to get into our Gardevoir EX on our second turn as we went first, right? Not that unlikely to hit Rare Candy Gardevoir. We are playing 3 copies. If we have a Lilies in our hand, if we have some good cards, we can easily do this. Now, what's the best play here? We see we have an Artisan in play, and we have necessary energy to attack in the discard pile, right? So what we can do here is we can Artisan for Iron Bundle, use Iron Bundle to push the Joltik away. Now, in their situation, what would they push, right? If they push Latias, we're going to KO it with Gardevoir plus Adrenabrain. Same thing with Pikachu and Miraidon. So realistically, for them to not get KO'd, they need to push the Iron Hands, right? Now imagine if the Iron Hands is not charmed, then we can KO it with Enamorus, and one Adrenabrain. But for the purpose of this example, let's assume that the Iron Hands is charmed, right? So we push the Joltik to the bench, they promote Iron Hands, and then what do? Right? What's our best attack here? Now here, we can actually right away checkmate them turn 2, right? We can use Adrenabrain to KO the Joltik on the bench, taking 1 prize, and then hit into the Iron Hands for 190, right? So this will be our first attack in our 3 attack combo. We take 1 prize on the Joltik, we hit the Iron Hands for 190. Now this Iron Hands will get amped by Mew EX no matter what. So they really have no way to win here, because we can take 1 on the Joltik, 3 on the Iron Hands, and then we can use Screamtail and double Munkidori or a Charmed Screamtail to KO either the Latias or the Miraidon for our final 2, right? So as you see here, if we're able to get into Gardevoir and we're able to start attacking early, the matchup is very, very favored. In this matchup, we can also use our Bravery Charms to protect our Munkidoris with Dark, right? If they ever get ahead, what we want to be doing is we want to be working towards a board that cannot be amped, right? Force them to charge up more attackers, force them to hit into our guys for not KO, right? Because if they are ever attacking and not taking two prizes, this is another turn for us, and we know that with Gardevoir, the longer the game goes on, the more favored we will be. So just some final points to think about here. This matchup is very, very linear. Just be careful to not fall too far behind. Use Iron Bundle in combination with Adrenabrain, Gardevoir EX, and Mew EX to really swing favorable prize trades. And we can always aim to end the game with a Screamtail and Charm. Or we can even use our Counter Catcher if needed, right? Set up multiple Munkidoris. Always try and force them to use Boss or Prime Catcher to take 2 prizes with an amp you very much. For example, we can have a Charmed Munkidori active with a couple of Ralts on the bench, maybe a Mew EX on the bench to protect from Iron Bundle, right? We always want to be playing around these themes. The next matchup I have here is going to be the End Zoroark matchup, right? This is Calvin Connor's 6th place list from Gdansk, and let's talk about some of the inclusions, right? So the most important one will be the Heroescape, right? This is going to be very hard for us to KO, very hard even to 2-shot. So the theme here is that we're going to need to play around the Heroescape and try and go around it. They have also powerful hand disruption with Airy and Mega Absol. They are great users of the clutch strategy, and they also have a threat onto our Gardevoir EX with End Zoroark. They play the 1 Turo, 2 Boss's Orders, and they can also charge attackers out of nowhere with the use of End's PP Up, Energy Switch, and Janine's Secret Art, right? So some of the key concepts here are that we need to try and outtrade them using single prizes, right? We have Enamorus, that is a strong single prize attacker that can 2-shot a Zoroark, as well as Screamtail in combination with a Bravery Charm can actually hit 280 fairly easily with the use of 2 Adrenabrains, right? So we're going to need to out trade them and hopefully get ahead early. Another common theme with all these dark type matchups is that we really want to be careful of giving them access to Counter Catcher, right? They only play 2 Boss's Orders, and we really want to force them to use Boss if they want to Gust, right? This is why we need to try and maintain a 1 prize board as long as possible, and to avoid taking KOs if we're not advancing the board state to a very favorable position. Fez can be a liability in a lot of situations because we don't want to get clutch locked, right? We want to be careful that our Turo is in deck And if we absolutely have to bench Fez, we want to make sure that we have access to it on the next turn. Right? This is very, very important. An example early game board. Here we can use Energize onto the Enamorus, present a 1 prize board, no Gardevoir in play. If they take 1, we can hit into the Enamorus. If they take 1 here and Zoroark, we can hit into the Zoroark with Enamorus for 200 and try and prize trade them that way, right? Because our ideal prize map will be, we will 2-shot a Zoroark with the Enamorus, and then we will 1-shot 2 Zoroarks with our Screamtail and 2 Bravery Charms, right? So this is the idea of what we should do when we are trying to prepare our board for when they initiate, right? There's also another kind of concept here where we might have the first move, right? In this hand right here, you see we have Rare Candy Gardevoir, an Artisan to search out any relevant attackers. So what should we do here, right? Something that's important to realize in the Zoroark matchup is that they are actually a setup deck, and they struggle to string a lot of attacks in a row, right? They play 1 End PB up, 1 Energy Switch, and Janines, right? But if they're using Janines, they're not using another setup supporter, so it might be difficult. So if we do get the chance to initiate, it's very important that we target weak pieces on their board. So in this situation, we can Rare Candy Gardevoir, we can Artisan for Screamtail, and then we can put 2 energies on the Screamtail, and then KO the active Zoroark, right? This allows us to not only pressure their energy, but it also allows us to reduce their draw on board, right? Less Zoras on board, less Zoras that can be evolved to Zoroark, which means -2 cards every turn. And if we can get rid of a Zora early, this means at the end of the game, it could be a deficit of 6 to 8 cards, right? Which is a huge card advantage. Zoroark also kind of struggles when dealing with this early pressure, right? Because even if we go Candy Gardevoir, KO the Zora that's in the active, they now need to find a way to get a 2 energy Zoroark. And even if they get a 2 energy Zoroark, KO on our Gardevoir EX, we can use Screamtail to KO another 1 prizer, going to 4/4 with no 2 prizer on board. They have to take 1, and then we can go into our play where we go Evolve into Gardevoir and try and 2-shot. We can try to KO 2 Zoroarks with Screamtail and 2 Bravery Charms, right? So this is very important. If we have the chance to initiate, I would often just initiate, especially if their board is weak, because we really need to put pressure on them as they are a setup deck and they're slow to get a strong, stabilized board. This is the early Screamtail that I was talking about, right? We can early Screamtail a Benzora. Make sure to put 3 energies onto this. We do not need to be scared of them using Adrenabrain to KO the Screamtail, as they will not have damage. But what this allows us to do is that if they go, charge up a Zoroark, KO the Gardevoir, this allows us to KO an opposing Munkidori, right? They could evolve all these Zoras, the Reshiram is out of range, and then we wouldn't have a way to take 1, right? So it's important that we put at least 60. We could also put 80. And we can move it onto the Munkidori or the Reshiram, going to 4/4. And then they must take 1 because we're not going to have a 2 prizer, and it's very hard for them to KO Fez. They need Mochi, Petron, Boss. So, it's not, they can do it, but early on in the game, it's somewhat difficult for them to do. And then after they go to 3, when we're at 4, we can go Screamtail 240 plus Double Monkey onto a Zoroark, and then do it again the next turn. Right? The problem here would be the Hero's Cape, right? If we try and do that, right? I mean, they have just CC'd our Gardevoir and KO'd it after we went ahead with Screamtail. In this situation, though, we're okay, right? They have 2 Zoroarks on board, the active with Heroescape. So our plan is we need to go around the Heroescape the whole game, right? If we take 2 turns to kill the Zoroark with Heroescape, it's not fast enough. They will out-trade us. So here, our plan is going to be maintain this one prize board apart from Fez. But Fez isn't actually a liability because they cannot Mochi onto their active since it has the Heroescape, right? So our Fez is relatively safe. Now, we're going to evolve into Gardevoir, and we're going to Screamtail the Munkidori, going down to 4-4. Now, same idea here. If they take 1, then we can go Screamtail, Double Monkey, KO Zoroark, go down to 2. Even if they take 2 prizes on the next turn, we have a chance to close out the game, right? So these are just some general concepts. Make sure that if you can go ahead early and pressure the board, pressure their energy, do it. But in situations where you cannot, make sure to maintain a 1 prize board, Energize to Enamorous, and start charging up threats without Gardevoir in play. Some final notes to keep in mind. Avoid giving them access to CC unless 6 prizes have been mapped out. Right, so in these examples, I'm saying, okay, it's fine to take 1 with Screamtail early because we already know what our plan will be, right? We're going to use Screamtail to KO Zora, and then use that same Screamtail to KO Munkidori, and then we're going to use 2 more Screamtails to take 4 prizes, right? So it's fine to go ahead, but we need to be sure that we have a proper prize map outlined and that we can actually win the game. Oftentimes it's going to be a 1-1-2-2 prize map, right? So we have 2 charms to KO 2 Zoroarks, and then the other 2 prizes, we can find them in some way, right? We can even use Enamorous onto an active early while maintaining a 1 prize board, and this is very strong, right? They have very limited ways of charging up energies, right? They have 1-ups to charge energy, so we really want to focus their energy with Screamtail, right? Even if they didn't attach to a Zora, we might want to KO the Munkidori with energy because this stops energy switch, right? So we always want to be aware of what the best target is. Be careful of Clutch, right? We want to avoid benching liabilities because they can actually generate damage themselves by using Petulant to poison their active, giving them Munkidori. And if they have the Munkidori lead and they are poisoning us, they will be doing more damage because they are doing 20 a turn with Clutch. So this is very, very dangerous, and we need to make sure that we are ready to respond to Clutch with Tera. So just to summarize a bit here, right? Try to go ahead early if you can hit an early turn 2 Candy Gardevoir and start pressuring the Zoras. If not, try and set up a 1 prize board, threaten 2 shots with Enamorous, and always focus their resources and always focus their energy, right? They draw a lot of cards per turn, but they don't have that many options if we know what their list looks like and if we know what they're trying to do, right? So when you're practicing, be careful of this idea that, you know, we are playing the resource game and we really want to take advantage of the weaknesses of their board early. So just some final closing thoughts. If you got to the end of the video or if you watched it at all, thanks so much for your support. I really had a blast making this, and I will continue and try to put out this maybe more competitive skewed content because this is what I enjoy and this is what I do as a player, right? So moving forward, looking at the Phantasmal Flames format, I have a bit of an updated list that keeps a lot of the same themes, right? So here we have a 3-2-2 Gardevoir line, right? Now this is heavily respecting Dragapult Dusknoir. Having 2 Kirlia allows us to draw into Kirlia more often, and combined with the 2 TM evolution, it is much easier to get into Gardevoir throughout the game, right? Not totally sure if this is really necessary, as it will depend on how popular Dragapult Dusknoir is. And also, the Fez line going Cruel Arrow, KOing a lot of their board pieces in combination with the Energize is quite strong. And I actually think that you win a lot of games even without Gardevoir EX. Right? Everything else is quite standard. I am playing 2 Evo with 1 Turbo Energize and the Town Store for easier access, right? So even if we aren't playing 2 TM Energize, we are still playing similar outs to it. Now I'm playing 2 Arvin to find our tools better. And the biggest thing here will be the Mega Diancie EX. So if we really think about it, Mega Diancie actually fulfills a lot of the conditions that we are trying to use Enamorus for, right? We want an attacker that is not Dark Weak, that does decent damage, and that can present threats on board without Gardevoir, right? So Mega Diancie will be incredibly powerful in all of these Dark type matchups, like Charizard, Grimmsnarl, Absol Box, and Zoroark, right? Not only this, but this allows us to hit for even higher damage, right? Into stuff like Gholdengo. We only need 1 Monkey Dory to KO Gholdengo, and in combination with Turo and Diancie's ability, we can actually tank a lot of damage with this card, right? So I talked a lot about, energizing onto Enamorus early, presenting a 1 prize board. Well, the same thing holds true, right? But instead of Enamorus, now we have Mega Diancie, right? We can energize onto Mega Diancie, no Gardevoir on board, no Dark Weak Pokemon, and we can actually present very strong threats without Gardevoir, right? So this is all, theoretical, has to be tested, but definitely this Mega Diancie card is an absolute game changer for all these dark matchups that are actually not that bad, right? Even though that we are weak to dark, Gardevoir is so powerful and so versatile that we are almost favored or even to slightly unfavored into most of them, right? So I'll leave you off with this. I'll be testing for Stuttgart, and I'll be testing Gardevoir for the next few formats. We'll probably be playing this deck until it rotates. But yeah, that's all for me. Thanks so much for watching, and hope you enjoyed.